Stephanie Bennett was born on August 30, 1979, in the small American town of Rocky Mount, Virginia. After her parents divorced during her childhood, Stephanie lived with her mother. Despite the divorce, her father lived nearby, and Stephanie would see him nearly every day. Later on, her father remarried, giving Stephanie a stepsister named Diana. Upon finishing high school, Stephanie attended Roanoke College, which was 350 kilometers from her home. In her senior year, she met a young man named Walter, and they started dating. After college, the couple split but continued their relationship even as they moved to different cities. Stephanie moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, alongside her stepsister Diana and a mutual friend named Emily. The three shared an apartment in the Bridgeport residential complex located in a quiet, peaceful area on the outskirts of the city. Stephanie secured a job at IBM, while her boyfriend moved to Greenville, South Carolina, to pursue an engineering degree. After living in Raleigh for about a year, and with Stephanie recently having turned 23, she, her stepsister, and her friend were planning to relocate to different cities. Stephanie intended to move to Greenville to be with Walter, and the couple had already begun looking for a place to live together. In May, Stephanie visited Greenville, where she and Walter viewed several apartments and chose one suitable for them. Upon her return to Raleigh, she found that Emily had moved to another city, and Diana had left for a few days to attend a funeral. On the night of May 20, Stephanie came home from work and spoke on the phone with Walter, who was to fax her the lease agreement for the new apartment for her signature. They agreed that Walter would send it the following day when Stephanie could use the fax machine at her workplace. The next day, Walter was unable to reach Stephanie by phone, either at work or at home. After several unsuccessful attempts and Stephanie failing to show up for work, her friends and family became concerned and contacted the police. When the police arrived at her apartment, they found Stephanie deceased on the floor of her bedroom. Upon finding identification documents and confirming through a photograph, they identified Stephanie as the victim. Investigators noted a dirty clothes hamper under the window of Emily's bedroom, which had been moved. They surmised that the killer could have entered the apartment through the window. Additionally, they found the home phone in Emily's bedroom closet with its cord cut, suggesting the perpetrator had hidden there and disabled the phone to prevent the victim from using it. After speaking with Diana, the police learned that several items were missing from the apartment. The perpetrator had taken $8 from Stephanie's wallet, 2 recorders, and the clothes hamper from Stephanie's room, presumably to carry the stolen items. Forensic experts found DNA evidence on the victim and took a sample, but it did not match any records in the FBI database. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation. Notably, the murder weapon was not found at the scene, leading to the belief that the killer had taken it. Investigators interviewed other residents of the apartment complex, hoping someone might have seen the killer. During these interviews, it came to light that for several months, residents have reported someone lurking around and peeping through windows of the complex. The manager was questioned, but the complex administration could not locate the suspect. Notably, at least once, this individual was seen at Stephanie's window. Moreover, a few months before, an unknown man attacked a woman jogging near the lake by the complex. After this incident, Stephanie was scared to stay alone in her apartment and wished to move to Greenville as soon as possible. Investigators examined the complex's surroundings and found something peculiar. In the bushes, they discovered several dozen women's underwear, later identified as belonging to Stephanie. The police theorized that the murderer might have taken these from the apartment, but then discarded them in the bushes for some reason. However, this theory was soon disproved. It turned out that a teenager living in the adjacent apartment regularly entered Stephanie's room and stole her underwear, then discarded them in the bushes. The young man admitted this when questioned by investigators, but denied any involvement in the murder. His DNA did not match the sample from the crime scene, so he was no longer considered a suspect. The police thought that the man who had been spying on women through the apartment windows was the most obvious candidate for the murder. After speaking with everyone who had seen this mare, the detectives created a composite sketch and published it in the newspapers, but without success. As standard procedure, investigators checked Stephanie's boyfriend, who voluntarily provided a DNA sample that did not match the murderer's. Additionally, at the time of the murder, Walter was several hundred kilometers away and could not physically have been at the scene. Subsequently, the police asked all the men in the complex to voluntarily provide a DNA sample. This also yielded no results. No match was found among the 283 DNA profiles received, and at this point, there were no significant leads. Detectives organized surveillance of the apartment complex in hopes of catching the man who had been spying on residents. To their surprise, they soon succeeded. On June 3, police observed a man approaching several ground floor windows and looking inside the homes. While at one of the windows, this man began to masturbate, and the police immediately arrested him. This individual turned out to be Christopher Lee, who had been convicted multiple times for peeping and stalking women, including a 3-year prison sentence for harassment in 2000. The detectives thought they had finally caught the killer, but were disappointed. Christopher's DNA did not match the sample found on Stephanie's body. He was charged with peeping but was no longer considered a suspect in the murder. The police continued working on the case without any significant leads. A year later, the lead detective heard about a lab in Florida that could determine a person's ethnic ancestry based on their DNA. Despite doubts about this technology, he did not want to miss an opportunity, so he sent the DNA of 4 of his colleagues of different ethnic backgrounds as a test. The experts completed the task with 100% accuracy, and the detective then submitted the killer's DNA from Stephanie's case. At the lab, they determined that the DNA owner was Caucasian, but this information did not significantly aid the police. In August 2003, the victim's father offered a $100,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of the killer. Stephanie's mother wrote a letter published in local newspapers, imploring people to share any information with the police that could help identify the suspect. This generated some new leads, but they led nowhere. In April 2004, based on numerous witness accounts, the detectives decided to re-interview all residents of the complex. They learned that the man arrested for peeping might not be the only one lurking around the complex buildings and looking through others' windows. Having identified the first man and possessing his photos, the investigators wanted to speak again with residents who had seen a man spying around. Unfortunately, none had seen his face. He often appeared during the dark hours, wearing a hood over his head. Some witnesses mentioned they had seen him without a hood, but could only make out his long hair. Detectives interviewed dozens of individuals until they finally found someone who had seen this person near Stephanie Bennett's window before her murder. This witness already had given a statement to the police, but now remembered something else. He saw the man a few days after the incident. The man was walking his dog near a wooded area behind the residential complex, recognizable by his hoodie. The witness watched the man until he disappeared among the trees with his Labrador. It seemed the witness had either forgotten this detail or hadn't thought it related to the murder, so the police didn't have this information during the initial interrogations. 2 years after Stephanie's death, detectives learned they should be looking for a man with a Labrador who, since he walked the dog in that area, likely lived nearby. Detectives found an interesting fact. There was another residential complex behind the wooded area where the man was spotted. Assuming the dog owner might live there, the police inquired with the complex staff if they knew of a man with a Labrador. They were immediately given the name Drew Planton, a 35-year-old regarded as somewhat odd by complex employees. He was described as reclusive, hardly speaking to anyone, never making eye contact, and always wearing loose-fitting clothing, presumably to avoid drawing attention to himself. Upon further investigation, they spoke with an elderly resident who kept an eye on the complex's goings-on. When told they were investigating Stephanie Bennett's murder, she expressed surprise that no one had been arrested, mentioning that boy with the big dog as a known figure. The residents had suspected this man, but had not reported their suspicions to the police. Drew had since moved elsewhere in the city. The detectives attempted to contact him at his new apartment, but received no response despite repeated visits at various times. While searching for Drew, the police interviewed his neighbors who shared alarming details. A woman living above him saw Drew with a young man shortly after Stephanie's murder, and Drew was reportedly telling the young man not to talk to the police. This led investigators to believe that the young man might have been involved in the theft of undergarments from the victim's apartment. Other women had felt menaced by Drew. They observed him while jogging or in secluded places, watching closely or even following them. Unable to contact Drew at home, detectives found his workplace and approached him there. Drew, a chemist in a fertilizer production lab, denied knowledge of Stephanie Bennett's murder, which was odd considering his close proximity to the crime scene. He was uncooperative, but agreed to answer questions at his home at a scheduled time. When detectives met with him at his apartment, he denied ever walking his dog near Stephanie's complex. Given the numerous witnesses who had seen him in the area, the detectives immediately suspected he was lying. He also claimed not to wear glasses, contrary to his driver's license information and witness descriptions of a man peering into apartment windows wearing glasses. Predictably, Drew refused to voluntarily provide a DNA sample. The detectives decided to surveil him in hopes of obtaining a DNA sample by other means, but this proved challenging as he left no items behind that could be analyzed in a lab. For example, during lunchtime, he would leave work, sit in his car, and simply stare at a fixed point. Didn't the man eat anything? As a result, detectives were unable to retrieve any object with his DNA. Detectives observed as Drew discarded an empty water bottle into a trash container. They retrieved it and took it to the laboratory. However, the experts were unable to obtain a DNA sample from it. According to one account, Drew deliberately took a clean bottle and threw it away on the street, knowing he was under surveillance. After that, the police decided to try and obtain his trash, but they also failed in this endeavor. For several days, they never saw him take out the trash. Notably, the man's neighbors also couldn't recall ever seeing him with a trash bag. Later, the investigators sought assistance from Drew's boss. She agreed to help them obtain an item from his workplace that might contain his DNA. She observed him for several days, but was never able to retrieve any object. Drew rarely ate at work, never discarded anything, and not a single hair could be found in his office. Given that the man had long hair, this seemed odd. The investigators were already convinced that Drew was meticulously eliminating any traces so they couldn't obtain his DNA. Once, the boss saw him pick up his hair and tie it with an elastic band. After that, he meticulously picked up any strands that had fallen to the floor. Then the woman decided to invite him to lunch at a cafe to supposedly discuss some work matters. But even there, the man was extremely cautious. Eating mostly with his hands, he stored all used napkins in his pocket and even took the straw and the glass with his drink. For dessert, he ordered banana pudding, and Drew finally used a fork. However, after using it, he cleaned the fork with a damp napkin for 15 minutes, eliminating any possibility of obtaining a DNA sample from the utensil. Despite this, the investigators took the fork and brought it to the laboratory. The experts were able to find small DNA samples that showed a partial match with the DNA at the crime scene of Stephanie Bennett. However, the result was too inconclusive as more biological material was needed for a complete comparison. In the end, the detectives obtained a search warrant for Drew's workplace, hoping to find an item containing his DNA. The investigators were also concerned that the man might flee once he realized they were executing the search warrant, so they decided to conduct it at night. Among the suspect's belongings, they found gloves he was supposed to use while working with chemicals. The detectives suspected that his DNA might be inside the gloves, so they took them and replaced them with another pair. They still feared that Drew might flee if he realized the police had his DNA. Experts found biological material inside the gloves, and the DNA analysis showed a complete match. Finally, the detectives were confident that Drew was responsible for the murder of Stephanie Bennett and had undeniable evidence in their hands. On October 18, 2005, the police quietly surrounded the laboratory where the man worked and waited for him to exit. The investigators feared that attempting to arrest him inside the building might lead to him taking a colleague as a hostage or attacking them. These fears were not unfounded, as when the man left the building, they immediately arrested him. They found a loaded firearm in his possession, indicating he was well aware that the police were close to capturing him and had no intention of surrendering easily. During the interrogation, which lasted more than 6 hours, Drew did not say a word, refused food and water, and barely moved. In the end, detectives had to place him in a wheelchair to move him around. With a search warrant for his apartment, the investigators found a stash of stolen clothing belonging to Stephanie. Additionally, they discovered 9 pistols, 2 rifles, 40 knives, a pair of handcuffs, and a machete. They also found lock-picking tools and handcuffs. The detectives came across a notebook with dozens of women's names, which they immediately started to trace to ensure their safety. It turned out that one of the women was the same resident of his apartment complex who had complained about Drew during the interrogation. She said that the man watched her on the street, and she felt consistently uncomfortable. Her fears were confirmed when the police found her underwear and tampons in Drew's house. Moreover, there was a copy of her high school graduation videotape. It turned out that Drew had entered her apartment, taken the tape, made a copy, and returned it. All this time, he had kept these items even after moving. In his apartment, they also found a check made out to the woman who was murdered in 1999. The investigators discovered that at that time, Drew lived in the same city. Additionally, the woman had been killed with a firearm of a quite rare caliber. But it was precisely that weapon, found in the man's collection during the search, that made Drew a suspect in this case. However, he first had to stand trial for the murder of Stephanie Bennett. A month after his arrest, the prosecution officially announced that they would seek the death penalty. The trial was set to begin the following year, and Drew spent that time in solitary confinement, but the trial never took place. On January 1, 2006, Drew was found dead in his cell, despite all the precautions that were in place. The investigators had no doubt that Drew had killed Stephanie Bennett, but after searching his house, the inevitable question arose: how many other victims might this person have had? At the very least, it was probable that he had been behind the murder of a woman in 1999. The detectives were almost certain that Drew might have been involved in other crimes as well. After carefully studying his background, the police uncovered several interesting details. Drew was raised in a complete family with 3 siblings. His father constantly humiliated and beat the children until their mother fled with them to another state. As a result, Drew became a very introverted teenager, a trait that intensified over time. Despite this, he received a good education and found a decent job as a chemist. His colleagues said that he was very intelligent, but his social skills were practically non-existent. He had no friends, did not talk to anyone at work, and always tried to keep as far away from the group as possible. Interestingly, Drew's biological brother also had a criminal record. He spied on women with a hidden camera and received a suspended sentence. In 2008, Drew's mother sued the state government, accusing the authorities of allowing her son's death. However, the judge concluded that the prison guards had taken all necessary precautions and could not have stopped the man. Stephanie Bennett's father tried to sue the management of the apartment complex for ignoring residents' reports of a man who was spying, as well as for not paying enough attention to the safety of residents on the premises. According to him, there was insufficient lighting around the buildings in the dark, and anyone could walk there unnoticed. He also found out that the window of his daughter's apartment was broken, but the complex's management did not rush to fix this problem, despite it being their direct duty. In the end, however, he withdrew these accusations without commenting on his decision. Thus, this complex and puzzling case was finally resolved. The police still wonder today how many other victims might Drew have had. The available information suggests that the man was prone to committing serial crimes, but after his death, it became practically impossible to know the truth. Laura SEO Lopez was born on November 11, 2000, in the city of Plovier, Argentina. Her older sisters, Melissa and Damaris, adored her from the very first moment. When Laura was just 3 years old, her mother passed away in a car accident, leaving the three sisters in the care of their father. Initially, he worked hard to keep the family afloat, but a few years later, he fell into alcoholism. Despite the terrible things happening around her, Laura was a very sweet and affectionate child, which is why her sisters started calling her Cielo, or Heaven, in English, a nickname that everyone who knew her would eventually adopt. As the years went by, the girl's father lost his job, and all of them had to look for work. At 18, Laura spent her days selling fried cakes, then attended high school in the evening shift, and in her free time, she took care of her nephews. She was very close to graduating, and dreamed of finding a good job to restore financial stability to her family. Unfortunately, an event occurred that prevented this from happening. On September 12, 2019, Cielo spent the entire afternoon with Damaris, circling her mata while she cleaned the house. Her sister joked that it was the first time she had made the infusion correctly. It was a cheerful day. Later, Cielo went to school, where her classmates noticed she was acting strange. She didn't sit in her usual spot, but at the back of the classroom and left 20 minutes before class ended. Around 11:30 p.m., she arrived home, where she met up with some friends. They spent a good time chatting, drinking beer, and taking selfies to post on Instagram. At 3 in the morning, they said goodbye to Cielo because she was very tired and said she was going to sleep. The next day, Nelisa wrote to her asking if she had gone to a medical appointment for an ear problem, but she got no response. She then called Damaris to find out if she was with her. The concern grew as Cielo was also not at her house. Hours passed, and the young woman still hadn't appeared, so they decided to report her missing to the police. Once at the police station, the officers told them they had to wait 48 hours from the last time they saw Cielo to request a search. They claimed she was probably with some boy, as this was supposedly common among teenagers. However, by Saturday, Cielo had not shown any signs of life, and the police finally took the report and began searching for her, but it was already too late. On Sunday the 15th, two fishermen, aged between 20 and 30, were carrying out their work in the area of the breakwaters of the Limahi River. This location was only 15 kilometers from Cielo's house. They were calm until they saw something that took their breath away: the body of a young woman, cut into 8 parts, floating in the water. They quickly notified the authorities. On arrival, the first thing the authorities noticed was the brutality of the body's condition. It had clearly been cut by someone skilled with knives. The detectives continued to search the area to see if they could find clues about the victim's identity. Nearby in the same river, they found some tights and underwear. Not far away, they found 2 rings and, eventually, a knife full of blood at the bottom of the river. They decided to call Cielo's family. When Damaris arrived at the scene and saw the objects, she did not doubt for a second that they belonged to her sister. The autopsy was conducted by Dr. Carlos, who noted that the cause of death had been a severe skull trauma, causing internal cerebral hemorrhage. The trauma was caused by a blow to the occipital part of the head, resulting in loss of consciousness. Cielo had been agonizing for 2 to 4 hours. Had she received medical attention, she might have survived. She also had bruises on her arms, indicating she had been struck and had struggled to save herself from her attacker. Moreover, the forensic examination confirmed what Cielo's sisters feared. The body had intimate injuries compatible with abuse. Finally, it indicated that due to the characteristics of the cuts on the neck, arms, and legs, it could be affirmed that the perpetrator used knives with a flat and scalloped edge, meaning they had no medical or anatomical knowledge, which broadened the list of suspects. The detectives had no idea who could have committed such a heinous crime. By analyzing the location of Cielo's cell phone, they detected that a man had contacted her after 3 in the morning on Friday. His name was Alfredo Escobar. He was 28 years old and worked as a mechanic. In the past, he had attended the same high school as Cielo. He was fond of fishing, which likely meant he knew how to handle a knife. The distance between his home and the crime scene was 2.5 kilometers, or about 20 blocks, which helped with the cell phone tower signals. At 3 o'clock, 3:22, 3:36, and 3:40 a.m. on September 13th, the young woman received 4 calls from this man. By then, the cell towers placed each of them in their respective homes. Then both cell phones were activated at her house. Starting at 4:29 a.m., the young woman's phone moved towards the downtown area and ended up at Escobar's residence. At 5 a.m., Cielo uploaded a WhatsApp story with an alien emoji. Her cell phone was still at the man's house. By 5:52 a.m., the young woman's mobile phone stopped emitting a signal, and after that, no one heard from her again. These records also showed that Escobar turned off his cell phone until 11:05 p.m. the next day. At that time, the phone was picked up by a cell tower in the place where Cielo's remains were later found. At 12:05 a.m. on Sunday, September 15th, he returned to his home. The investigation also included analysis of videos from 13 security cameras, including urban monitoring, private homes, and businesses, specifically reviewing footage from the early hours of September 13th. In 2 of these video records, 2 people could be seen walking back to back, resembling Cielo and Escobar, matching the young woman's cell phone movement. There was no doubt Escobar was the only suspect in the case. During the investigation, one of the officers recognized him, recalling an encounter a year prior. Escobar had crashed into a police patrol while driving at over 80 kilometers per hour, resisted arrest, and had an active case against him. He was close to going to trial for this incident, but now he faced a completely different and much more serious charge. On September 17th, a police watch was set up about 30 meters from Escobar's house. At 8:30 a.m., they saw a car arrive, and a young person who appeared to be the suspect got out. He entered the house and then came out accompanied by 2 adults around 60 years old. All 3 got into the vehicle. Without raising suspicion, the officers followed the vehicle for a while, noting that it stopped near a highway bridge. At that moment, Escobar and the older man got out of the car, and the police approached them to request their documentation. Escobar was in the company of his father, and the other person inside the vehicle was none other than his mother. It was clear they were attempting to flee the city. The young man did not resist the procedure but appeared extremely nervous. He asked if he could smoke and wanted to move away from the police car. When told this was not possible, he put out the cigarette sack in his car and lit one. After a while, he was taken to the police station, and the vehicle was confiscated. A few hours later, he underwent medical examinations, which revealed inflammation in the knuckles of his right hand, consistent with having thrown a punch. He also had cuts on one finger and a bruise on the palm of his right hand. These injuries dated back a few days, likely to the date of Cielo's death, probably incurred while attacking the young woman. Following these examinations, Escobar was formally charged with abuse, carnal access, and femicide, utilizing his right to remain silent. He was placed in pretrial detention for 6 months, as there was considered to be a risk of flight or obstruction of the investigation. On September 17th, the first search of the Escobar family's house was conducted. The property was large, with 60 meters in depth and 12 meters in front. In the back, there was a construction project of 2 apartments. Entering the room where Escobar slept, they discovered that the walls had marks. They tested them with luminol and found what they suspected: blood. Then they went to the backyard, where things only got worse. Among the vegetation, they found blood remains. It was clear that Cielo had received there the blow that caused her death. The investigators took the blood to compare it with Cielo's and Escobar's, and also ordered a DNA test on the fluid found on Cielo's body to see if it matched the suspects. Escobar's lawyer argued that until those results were available, they should not accuse him of abuse. Fortunately, the results arrived quickly. The Central Laboratory of the Ministry of Public Health compared the samples collected during the search with the genetic profile of the victim and the accused. all showed a match. They also analyzed the sneakers that Escobar was wearing at the time of his arrest and the knife found at the bottom of the river. Both items had Cielo's DNA on them. Then, 3 swabs were taken from the intimate areas, and one of them showed compatibility with Escobar's DNA. The investigators were now in a position to affirm that the subject had abused Cielo, then murdered her, dismembered her, and disposed of her body. On September 21, the justice system confirmed these findings during a press conference. The case prosecutor stated that he suspected the individual had murdered Cielo to hide the abuse. If found guilty of this charge, he would receive a life sentence. However, more evidence was still needed. Escobar declared himself innocent, but again, technology would expose him. His cell phone was confiscated, and by court order, he had to provide the access code for forensic analysis. It was found that although he had Cielo among his contacts, he had deleted her after the night of her disappearance. After committing the act between 6 and 10 in the morning, he deleted the call logged to the victim, but he did not delete their Facebook Messenger chat. The investigation also revealed that on September 11, 12, and 13, the subject had accessed the social network to view the photographs Cielo uploaded. Despite the evidence, the sinister man continued to claim his innocence, but everything was against him. A hypothesis was finally formulated about what happened on the night of the crime. On Thursday, September 12, 2019, Cielo left high school around 8 at night, returned home, and spent some time with friends until 3 in the morning, when she told them she was tired and would go to sleep. 40 minutes after she was left alone, she received a message from Escobar, and they began to chat. Although they knew each other from living in the same city and attending the same school, they were not friends. However, they had mutual acquaintances, which gave her confidence. After a while of chatting, the subject asked if she could come over. She calmly accepted, and at 4, he picked her up and went to his house. What happened in the house was a mystery, but considering the forensic analysis, it was believed that Cielo opposed having relations with the man. Completely enraged, he proceeded to abuse her. After committing the terrible act, he began to fear that she would report him. That's when he decided to take her life. He took her to the back of the house and hit her twice in the head. However, he did not achieve his goal. Cielo was still alive, agonizing. In a totally cruel act, Escobar hid her body for a couple of hours while thinking about what to do. He turned off his phone so that no one would bother him. Cielo's body was in the under construction part of the house for almost 24 hours. During that time, the contusion she had received took her life. Finally, the subject dismembered the body with a sharp knife from his kitchen, hid the body in his car, and drove 15 kilometers to the area at the Limahe River. He disposed of the body parts, throwing them away as if they were worthless. Once there, he turned his phone back on, relieved and believing he had finished the job. The story of the case became public, and all of City strongly condemned the accused. But the most striking declaration came from Escobar's 23-year-old younger sister, who posted a message on her social networks addressing both her brother and the victim. The publication received mixed reactions. Some people empathized with her, while others accused her of being complicit. Following these attacks, the girl asked that the focus not be lost on what was important, Cielo and her family. She demanded that the fight continue so that there would be no more victims of femicide. Melissa, on her part, contacted Escobar's sister and thanked her for the post. She also requested that people stop attacking her, as she was not to blame. Then the trial against the accused began. In the first hearing, the prosecutor accused Escobar of being the only responsible for the act. The charge was for aggravated homicide against a woman, involving gender violence and abuse with carnal access. In that same hearing, the experts who had intervened in the analysis of the clothing found in the river alongside the remains, and in the evidence found at the bottom of the subject's home, testified. But the most striking confession came from Cielo's best friend. During the trial, she recounted that for months, Escobar had been sending messages to Cielo, inviting her to have a good time and drink beer, but they had never had a date. For her part, she had known him for about 5 years and was aware of his bad reputation. For a long time, Escobar's house had been a party place. Every weekend, the house was filled with alcohol and substances, and there were even couples who had intimacy in front of the rest of those present. She had attended those gatherings but decided to distance herself from that environment when she started a relationship and became pregnant. She emphasized that Cielo had never gone with her. She repeatedly advised Cielo not to meet with Escobar. Cielo always said she wouldn't and that she ignored his messages. However, the defense asked why she didn't recommend Cielo to block the contact. Firmly, she replied that it was her friend's decision and she didn't want to tell her what to do with her life. While she remained on the stand, she was shown the security camera footage from the day Cielo disappeared. They specifically showed her the footage from 4 in the morning, where 2 people were seen walking backwards through downtown. She had no doubt in recognizing that it was Cielo. She said that her sneakers, her coat, and her way of walking were unmistakable, and she also identified Escobar. As if this witness was not enough, another woman expressed her need to testify against the accused. The prosecution and the victim's family requested that her name remain anonymous and that the accused not be present. The judge granted the request, but allowed the accused to stay on one side of the room, out of the witness's sight. The woman narrated that sometime before the incident, Escobar had gone out with her. They met through Facebook, the same social network through which he contacted Cielo. They bought 2 beers and took a walk around the neighborhood, then bought 2 more beers. It was then that Escobar invited her to his house with clear intentions of intimacy. She told him she didn't want to, and the man appeared frustrated, but did not force her. She told him she wanted to change, to be someone new. They were together until about 2 in the morning. Once Escobar returned home, he messaged her again, asking her to have sex. He insisted for a while, but she stopped responding. It was probably at that moment that he contacted Cielo. When the girl found out he was the main suspect in the incident, she was in shock. She hesitated a lot before going to the police station, thinking that if she talked to him, she might convince him to turn himself in voluntarily, but that didn't happen. After hearing the statement, the defense asked if Escobar had been violent towards her in an attempt to discredit her story. She replied that he had not. However, Escobar's impulsive behavior was evident when a friend testified against him, saying he was a womanizer with a substance addiction. His ex-partner also took the stand, stating they had not ended on good terms. Years earlier, she had reported him because she suspected that he had broken into her house and stolen her money. When she confronted him to return her things, Escobar hit the friend who was with her. In response to these statements, the accused tried to defend himself, pointing to a friend who was also his drug dealer as the perpetrator of the crime. He narrated that on the night in question, he was under the influence of substances, and this man was with Cielo at his house. At one point, Escobar heard a scream from one of his rooms and ran to see what had happened. Once he saw the blood, he focused on cleaning it up, then helped his friend hide Cielo's body, referring to it as that thing. At the end of his story, he thanked for having the space to share his version of the truth. However, no evidence was found, and this statement did not prosper. Escobar remained the only suspect. In his closing argument, the prosecutor argued that the man had taken advantage of his prior knowledge of the victim and betrayed her trust. He planned the brutality of his actions and the despicable manner in which he had dismembered and hidden the body. He asserted that the accused had a contemptuous relationship with women, evidenced when he referred to Cielo's body as that thing. The jury's deliberation took only 40 minutes. In a unanimous verdict, Escobar was found guilty of abuse with carnal access and homicide. The latter had the aggravating factor of having been carried out to hide the abuse and for involving gender violence. For this reason, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Although the case did not go unpunished and tranquility was restored to the community, the problem has not been solved. The rate of cases in Argentina continues to rise every minute. The case of Cielo highlights the need for a program to educate children, young people, and adults on gender issues. The young woman's family launched an initiative to make this possible. In September 2020, almost a year after the murder, the Cielo Lopez Law was approved. This law mandates training on the subject for students and teachers at all levels of the provincial educational system to prevent violence against women. Rachel Morin was born on January 17, 1981, in England and was the youngest of 4 siblings, having 2 sisters and 1 brother. They all lived together in their hometown. From an early age, Rachel developed a keen interest in music and dance, particularly ballet. She excelled academically in school and later attended a local college to study information technology. However, she eventually decided to focus on her passion for dance. In college, Rachel met a young man named Mark, and they soon started dating. They decided to move in together and rented an apartment in a quiet residential area, which was only a kilometer away from Rachel's parents' home, allowing her to visit them frequently. Rachel also found a job at a local bakery, where she enjoyed decorating cakes. This experience sparked her interest in pursuing a culinary education. In December 2002, when Rachel was 21, she and Mark adopted 2 kittens. They were both very attentive to the pets, ensuring they were never left alone for long periods. As a result, Rachel and Mark always planned their activities to ensure someone was home to care for the animals. This included their New Year's Eve plans, where Mark was to visit his parents and return in the evening, while Rachel planned to go to a bar with her brother to celebrate. On the night of December 31st, Rachel met up with her brother, and they went to a bar, joined by some friends. After midnight, Rachel and her brother left the bar and arrived at their parents' house around 1:20 a.m. Before going to bed, Rachel decided to call Mark to check on him but found he was not home. She reached him on his mobile phone, and he informed her that he was at a party with friends. Disappointed that Mark had left the house and the kittens alone, Rachel decided to go back to their apartment instead of staying at her parents' house. Her mother tried to dissuade her from leaving due to the late hour and concerns for her safety, even though the apartment was only a kilometer away. After a long discussion, Rachel left for home, promising to call her mother upon arrival. However, after waiting for about an hour and a half without receiving a call, Rachel's mother tried to reach her both on her mobile phone and at the apartment but got no response. Rachel Moran's mother grew increasingly worried when she could not reach her daughter, suspecting that Rachel might have gone to the party where her boyfriend was and hence was not answering the calls. After trying to contact her until 4:30 a.m., the mother decided to go to sleep. She woke up around 10 a.m. and found her husband on the phone, hoping he was talking to Rachel. However, it was their eldest daughter on the line, who had been unable to reach Rachel all morning and was very worried. Realizing that Rachel had not returned home, the family began to panic. They tried calling her again, and after some time, Mark answered. He was surprised when asked if Rachel was home. He said he had returned around 7 a.m. and found that Rachel wasn't there. Assuming she had stayed at her parents' house, he didn't think much of it and went to sleep. According to Mark, there were no signs that Rachel had been in the apartment. Her belongings were not there. The bed was as he left it, and the kittens had not been fed. This escalated the family's panic. The family called Rachel's friends and other relatives, but no one had seen her that night. Subsequently, Rachel's parents decided to inform the police. Although Rachel was almost 22 years old and the police might typically wait before starting a search for a missing adult, they decided to begin the search immediately in this case. They inspected her apartment and interviewed all her family members and friends. The police quickly ruled out the possibility that Rachel had left of her own free will, given her background and the accounts of her loved ones. During the investigation, Rachel's mother recalled a moment from the night Rachel disappeared. When Rachel was leaving for her apartment, they had a discussion literally at the doorstep, standing with the door open as her mother tried to convince her to stay. At one point, an unknown man passed by the street. Rachel's mother even considered asking him to accompany her daughter home, but decided against it. After receiving a basic description of the man seen near Rachel Moran's location, the police began searching for him as he was headed in the same direction as Rachel shortly after her departure. This individual might have witnessed something relevant. Police units were alerted while the search for other clues continued. Investigators started scrutinizing Mark, Rachel's boyfriend. First, it was discovered that there had been an argument between them that night when Rachel found out he had gone to a party. Secondly, during his interactions with the police, Mark did not appear distressed despite his girlfriend's disappearance. These factors led the investigators to consider the possibility of his involvement in her disappearance, prompting them to verify his alibi. Mark stated he returned from the party after 6 a.m. The police confirmed his statement by speaking with people present at the party. Rachel's relatives also insisted that Mark would never harm her. Investigators requested Rachel's mobile operator and bank data and found that she had not used her phone or bank card since her disappearance. At that time, mobile phone geolocation tracking and cellular tower data were not sophisticated enough to be useful, especially over short distances. The police decided to obtain all surveillance camera recordings within a 10-kilometer radius of her route. Patrols were dispatched to each store, and residents in these areas were interviewed, hoping someone might have security cameras installed. Soon, they spotted Rachel on one of the cameras, just a few hundred meters from her residential complex, confirming she was heading home and not elsewhere. The search was intensified in this area, involving search dogs, helicopters, and dozens of officers combing streets, fields, and bodies of water. Streams and artificial channels were drained in the search, but these efforts yielded no results. As time passed, the police increasingly suspected that Rachel might no longer be alive, but the search continued on a larger scale. 2 weeks later, a concerning clue emerged. One of the channels near Rachel's apartment was drained, and her shoe, which she had worn when leaving her mother's house, was found. The following day, a trash bag was discovered in the same channel, containing a woman's purse with cosmetics, a mobile phone, and other items, including Rachel Moran's passport. These findings led Rachel's family and the investigators to believe she was probably deceased, and the police continued scouring the channels. There was a possibility that an unknown perpetrator had disposed of Rachel's body there, but further searches led to no additional discoveries. In the subsequent days, detectives dedicated even more effort to the case, deciding to resort to a popular tactic in England. The police found a woman who resembled Rachel Moran and dressed her in clothes similar to those Rachel wore on the night of her disappearance. They asked her to follow the same route Rachel took, and this reenactment was recorded and broadcast on local television channels. The purpose of this experiment was to find witnesses who might have seen Rachel on the night she disappeared but didn't think much of it, or had simply forgotten. The visual recreation of the scene was successful in jogging memories, and several people contacted the police with their observations after the broadcast. While these testimonies were ultimately not very helpful to the case, the detectives did gain some significant leads. In addition to witnesses, owners of surveillance cameras in the area also approached the police. Initially, the police had received most of these recordings, but some had been overlooked and proved to be fruitful. The administration of a school located about 150 meters from Rachel's apartment provided footage from the night in question. The quality was poor, but the police saw a woman heading towards the apartment complex and, seconds later, someone following her. They suspected this individual might be the unknown offender who could have attacked Rachel. However, the poor quality of the footage prevented identification of any distinguishing features. The police theorized that if the person responsible for Rachel's disappearance was this individual, they couldn't have transported her body too far without a car. They assumed the perpetrator lived in the area and decided to attempt to search every house within a 2-kilometer radius. This required residents' permission and considerable time, so over 100 officers were involved, knocking on doors and requesting to inspect properties. The search began on January 28th, with officers divided into groups, each accompanied by a specialist in property inspection. Hours into the search, one of the teams encountered something alarming at the last unit. The police were allowed inside by a man who answered the door, but initially found nothing suspicious. Before leaving, an officer noticed a small closet used for storing garbage, which was locked. The man couldn't recall where the key was, but eventually found it. When the officers opened the closet, they discovered numerous trash bags, empty boxes, and other objects. As they cleared the clutter, an officer noticed a human foot in one of the bags. Upon further inspection, they realized they had found the body of Rachel Moran. Wrapped in a blanket and tightly squeezed into the closet, which was very low, the officers were astounded at how the criminal managed to fit a human body in there. They immediately arrested the apartment owner, 23-year-old Michael Little, and his friend who was present during the visit. Little reacted calmly to his arrest, while his friend was shocked and confused about why they were being detained. After the arrest, the officers called the chief detective and waited for his arrival. They took Little's friend to the station while Little remained in the apartment with an officer, waiting for the next team. The officer decided to engage Little in conversation, and to his surprise, Little almost immediately began confessing in detail. Little expressed relief at being found, saying he had long wanted to tell someone. He narrated the sequence of events leading to the girl's death, but the officer found his version dubious. According to Little, on New Year's Eve, he saw Rachel on the street, approached her and talked to her, offering to go to his apartment. Rachel agreed, and they went to his place where they drank a bit. Then they argued over something unspecified. Little claimed he went to another room and, upon returning to the kitchen, found Rachel with her back to him, holding a knife. When she turned towards him and cut his hand, he panicked, grabbed a kitchen knife, and struck her, causing her death. The officer doubted the truthfulness of this story, as it seemed quite illogical. Nevertheless, he recorded Little's confession, and Little was soon taken to the station. During the interrogation, Little maintained his claim of self-defense. When asked why he didn't call the police, Little said he was scared and thought no one would believe him, so he decided to hide the body in his closet. Further investigation into Little's background revealed a significant criminal history. From a young age, he was caught stealing and committing other minor offenses. He was expelled from school several times, failing to obtain even a basic education. Little barely worked, stayed at home, and consumed alcohol and drugs. His acquaintances mentioned that Little often fantasized about meeting different women. He once even claimed he was dating a very tall and beautiful blonde girl. Although Little's friends knew he was not actually in any relationship, this detail caught the detective's attention. Rachel matched the description of the type of woman Little often fantasized about, approximately the same height and blonde hair. The detectives hypothesized that Little might have chosen Rachel as his victim based on these characteristics. They also established that Rachel did not know Little, despite living on nearby streets. The investigators reconstructed the timeline of that night and found that Little had been with his friends on the evening of December 31st, preparing to celebrate the new year. However, Little left their company in a rage because the girl he was trying to flirt with had left with his friend. He then headed to another party and left shortly after midnight, following a route that intersected with Rachel's path. Upon reviewing all available facts, the detectives came to an alarming conclusion. They recalled the stranger who passed by Rachel and her mother while the latter was pleading with her daughter not to walk home alone. The police suspected that this man was Little, a theory indirectly confirmed by surveillance camera footage. The recording showed a man resembling Little passing by shortly before Rachel, and in a subsequent recording, an unknown man was seen walking behind her. If this man was Little, he must have stopped somewhere to wait for Rachel to pass and then began following her. This scenario contradicted Little's own story. Further contradictions emerged after medical experts presented their report. Rachel's body had 27 stab wounds inflicted with great force, and she had no defensive wounds, contrary to Little's claim of a fight between them. Additionally, some of the wounds were inflicted from behind and no cuts were found on Little's hands. These facts unequivocally indicated that his story did not match reality. Based on all the available data, the detectives formulated a more plausible version of events. On that night, Little, feeling spurned from being rejected at the first party, passed by Rachel's mother's house. Hearing part of their conversation, he understood that Rachel would be walking home alone. She fit the type of woman he fantasized about, so he decided to attack her or try to talk to her. He advanced a bit, stepped off the main street and waited for Rachel to pass, then began following her. The situation could have developed in two scenarios. Either he attacked her immediately or attempted to flirt with her. In the scenario where Rachel might have ignored Little and walked away, there were several reasons for this. Firstly, she had a boyfriend. Secondly, she would not go to the home of a stranger who approached her on the street in the middle of the night. And thirdly, Rachel was very concerned about her kittens. Upon learning that her boyfriend had left them alone all night, she was focused on getting home as quickly as possible. The most likely scenario was that Little attacked Rachel when she was close to her home and dragged her to his apartment. Criminologists found evidence supporting this theory. There were mud stains on the back of Rachel's legs, indicating she had been dragged along the ground. They also determined that the murder did not occur in the kitchen, but in the hallway, where most of the bloodstains were found and which the criminal tried to clean. Despite all this, forensic experts determined that Rachel had been sexually assaulted and Little's DNA was found on her body. This indicated that Rachel could have been dead by the time these events occurred. Based on all this evidence, murder charges were filed against Little on January 31st. However, he had hired a lawyer by then and retracted his initial statements, claiming he had not killed anyone. Eventually, the case went to trial in October, where Little's lawyers presented a new version of events. Little now claimed that his friend was the actual murderer. This was the same friend who was arrested with him on the day Rachel's body was discovered but was later released due to a lack of evidence linking him to the case. According to Little, he returned home early in the morning and found his friend and Rachel there. He claimed his friend had met Rachel and decided to go to his apartment because he had the keys. The three of them drank together, and then Rachel and Little went to the bedroom and had sexual relations. Shortly after, his friend burst into the room, angry, feeling sympathy for the girl, and enraged upon discovering their relationship. He grabbed a knife and stabbed Rachel multiple times, then threatened Little. Little demanded that his friend help him clean up the blood and never speak of what happened. Otherwise, he threatened to kill not only Little, but also his loved ones. As one might expect, no one believed this story. It contradicted the evidence and common sense. All indications pointed to Little as the real murderer, with no evidence implicating his friend. The trial concluded fairly quickly since the defense could not present any evidence to refute their client's guilt. As a result, Little was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. If his parole application is approved, he could be released at the age of 58. Rachel's murder was a devastating blow to all her family members, but her older sister, who suffered from diabetes, was particularly affected. The stress of the situation severely impacted her health. After a long struggle, she passed away in 2010, and her family blames Little for her death as well. Thus, the actions of this criminal led to two tragic losses. Melissa Chavez was born in 2008 in the city of Coquimbo, Chile. She was the youngest child of Mirta Ardil and Denny Chavez, who already had 3 children. Although Mirta and Denny were really nice people, the couple decided to separate shortly after Melissa's birth after 8 years together. However, Melissa's paternal family continued to stay in touch with her. Her aunt, Gina Chavez, had a special affection for her and was always concerned for her well-being. To support her household as a single mother, Mirta worked various jobs, including in a bar. It was there she became very close friends with Maria Teresa Caballero, a co-worker. Almost every night after closing the bar, Maria would head to another nearby bar to work extra hours and earn more money. Since Mirta often accompanied her wherever she went, she eventually found employment at that place as well. One night, while Mirta was working at the bar, a regular customer approached her. His name was Luis. Although details about his life are scarce, it is known he was born in 1981, worked in a mine in Antofagasta, and lived with his then partner. This first encounter led to a romance that neither Luis's ongoing relationship nor their age difference, with Mirta being 8 years his senior, could prevent. Eventually, Luis left his partner and moved in with Mirta. By the year 2010, when Melissa was just 2 years old. By this time, Melissa's reserved nature was already evident, a trait that did not change much as she grew older. When she started school, she was kind but clearly found it hard to socialize and had few friends. Her shyness extended towards Luis, whom she saw as a stranger. However, in 2012, when her mother and he welcomed their first child together, the new sibling helped Melissa to start accepting Luis into her life. From that point forward, he also took on a role in her upbringing, offering her affection and care as if she were his own daughter. In turn, she began to refer to him as her father. This dynamic continued for a while, allowing Melissa to experience something she had almost never had, a sense of a home without fractures. But in 2014, Luis's behavior towards her changed. Everything occurred one afternoon when he was looking after her while Mirta was at work. Just then, without warning, what had always been merely affectionate treatment turned into inappropriate touching. Melissa first confided in one of her older sisters and only afterward alerted her mother. Around the same time, the girl was seen by her school's psychologist, to whom she also revealed what had happened. Faced with the alarming disclosure and the need to act to protect the girl, the news was communicated to the school's principal. She reached out to Mirta, and knowing how serious the situation was, the psychologist and they went to talk to the authorities. A complaint was filed through the psychologist and the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office immediately opened a case, and as a result, the courts decided to revoke the mother's custody of her daughter. Initially, it was thought that temporary custody would be given to the biological father. However, at that time, his situation was far from ideal. On the contrary, he was suffering from deep depression and struggling with alcoholism. As such, Melissa was placed in the care of her Aunt Gina. As for Mirta, in October 2014, the same court referred her to a family court program. The goal was to subject her to psychological and psychiatric assessments. Last but not least, to regain custody of her daughter, she was required to separate from Luis. During the process, she assured the authorities that she had indeed left him. However, the reality was that she was still in contact with him secretly. After 17 months, in March 2016, following supposed new evaluations that concluded Mirta was capable of resuming personal care of her daughter, the Child Protection Agency of Coquimbo returned the custody to her. Once Melissa was back home with her, the woman also took Luis back. Not content with having the girl and the aggressor live under the same roof, Mirta went to the authorities to retract the complaints against him. Since then, the agencies closed the investigation and did not follow up on the case. Several years passed with no records of any irregular events. It's unknown whether they didn't occur or were hidden. Thus, when September 2020 arrived, Mirta and Luis moved with Melissa and her younger brother to a 2-story house. The idea was to rebuild their lives in a calmer environment. Melissa, who was 12 years old at the time, had started secondary school and was in the 7th grade. As her mother had noticed, she was becoming a more independent young lady, which was evident, for example, in her long stays alone in her room, almost always listening to music. Sleeping in was another thing she enjoyed. And while she occasionally complained that her mother was too strict and demanding, overall, Melissa seemed content in the new neighborhood. But just then, Luis sought to resume the inappropriate behavior towards her, which had been suspended after the whole ordeal caused by the initial complaint. This time, fully aware of what was happening, Mirta chose to pretend nothing was happening. She didn't even make a complaint to protect her daughter. Instead, she often felt really jealous because Luis paid more attention to Melissa. The morning of November 26, 2020 proceeded with complete normality as everyone prepared to leave the house. But before that, Luis entered the teenager's room and, unlike previous instances, completed the act in its entirety. After the abuse, he left Melissa lying on her bed, devoid of any desire to move, deeply sad and ashamed. Around 10:30 that morning, Luis and his son left the house and took a taxi they had ordered in advance through an app. The sequence was recorded by the area's security cameras. While they were going to a vaccination day at the Sun School in the city center, Mirta was losing the battle against her inner demons. Alone with her daughter at home, the woman took a knife from the kitchen and went upstairs to Melissa's bedroom. At that time, the girl had succumbed to sleep amidst tears and despair. Once in front of her, her mother attacked her, causing multiple injuries that left her agonizing. Then, Mirta sent text messages to her dentist to arrange an appointment. Afterward, she returned to Melissa's room and set fire to the lower part of the bed, where the young girl had already lost all signs of life. It was just after 11 a.m. when closed-circuit cameras recorded her leaving the home. After stopping at a store to withdraw money, Mirta took a taxi she had ordered and went to her dental appointment. Once again, her movements were captured by cameras. Barely 7 minutes after her departure, neighbors noticed smoke coming from the house and contacted emergency services. Meanwhile, Luis and his son, on their way back, saw the fire truck speeding past them. As they approached their home, Luis could see the firefighter struggling to control the flames engulfing his house. Shocked and incredulous, he called Mirta. She confirmed that she had left Melissa sleeping. Upon receiving this information, his distress was uncontrollable, so much so that he even tried to enter, but the authorities prevented him. Meanwhile, neighbors tried to offer support and calm him down. Once the team managed to partially control the fire, they identified that it had originated in one of the bedrooms. Upon entering, they found Melissa's lifeless body, which had not been completely consumed by the fire. Initially, rescuers suggested that smoke inhalation might have been the cause of her death. As for Mirta, she returned home, ready to pretend. Already notified of the tragedy, both she and Luis appeared devastated in front of the neighbors and the television cameras present. Unaware of the truth, Luis demanded justice, stating, "The person responsible, they're going to have to pay. They will have to pay for everything they did." Once Melissa's remains were transferred to the morgue, the investigation at the scene continued, and investigators collected some kitchen utensils and other items from the house for further analysis. Early findings led to the initial hypothesis of death by smoke inhalation being dismissed, and the possibility of third-party involvement began to gain traction. In the preliminary autopsy report, forensic experts noted that the body showed signs of blunt force trauma and puncture wounds. While the prosecutor requested to wait for the final results, the information somehow leaked, and soon, neighbors took to the streets demanding justice for Melissa and expressing their fear of a criminal loose in the area. After the forensic analyses were completed, and while waiting for the detailed and definitive report, Melissa's body was released to her family for the wake and subsequent burial. At the funeral, Mirta urged anyone with relevant information to cooperate in the search for the truth and clarification of the case. Visibly affected, Luis did the same. However, suspicions were directed at the victim's mother, especially considering she had been the last to leave the house on that fateful day. Others claimed to have seen an older man leaving just before the smoke was noticed. This last theory was convenient for Mirta, who clung to it. However, upon reviewing the security cameras around the house, investigators found no evidence of the alleged presence of this individual. Therefore, they decided to pause this line of inquiry while continuing to search for new clues. Meanwhile, since their involvement could not be entirely ruled out, Luis and Mirta were summoned as suspects. On that occasion, both repeated their version of events. Additionally, their cell phones were made available to the authorities. Shortly after, the autopsy results confirmed the severity of the attack Melissa suffered, which, according to forensic doctors, would not have been fatal had she received timely medical help. The detectives in charge of the case revealed chilling details, confirming she suffered cranioencephalic trauma and had 11 sharp force injuries. The worst part was that they estimated she had agonized for approximately an hour. Recent sexual abuse was also indicated by injuries, but no genetic material could be retrieved. From that moment, Luis became a focus for the prosecutor, who could not ignore the 2014 precedent. Meanwhile, chemical tests performed on the seized utensils found traces of the victim's and her mother's DNA, particularly on the knife used in the attack. The prosecutor's office revealed crucial details about this evidence. The knife used in the attack had a distinctive tip damage, matching the injuries and fractures on the teenager's skull. Moreover, it wasn't just that the mother's and daughter's DNA was found, but where it was located. According to the Legal Medical Service, Melissa's genetic material was on the blade, and a significant genetic fingerprint of Mirta was on the handle. Chemical tests also showed that after being used as a weapon, it was washed to remove blood traces. With all this evidence supporting a case beyond reasonable doubt, on February 2nd, 2021, Mirta was arrested as the alleged perpetrator of the crime. Later, the police provided details including their knowledge of the events. At the formalization hearing, the public prosecutor charged Mirta with the crime of homicide. After presenting a video that evidenced the chronology of the event, the prosecutor pointed out the absence of eyewitnesses, the mother's attempt to erase all evidence, and the short span between her departure and the smoke sighting. In summary, for the public prosecutor, it was a passionate and ferocious crime. Although the defense insisted on her innocence, the prosecutor dismissed the idea outright. During the investigation, Mirta was held in preventive detention for 6 months. However, the public prosecutor's office still needed to investigate the nature of the relationship between Luis and the minor. Aware of his precarious situation, Luis fled. Despite authorities' efforts to locate him, neither relatives nor friends had any information about his whereabouts. In parallel, a multitude of neighbors and family members expressed their condemnation of Mirta, demanding justice for Melissa, while the house became a symbol of commemoration and protest. Mirta's defense attorney challenged the decision to keep her detained during the investigation period. But on February 10th, the Court of Appeals confirmed the preventive detention measure against Mirta. One of the most affected was obviously Gina Melissa's paternal aunt. Amid her grief, she criticized the failures of a system that, in her opinion, did not adequately follow up with the family or verify that the mother was qualified to regain custody. She was particularly outraged that the authorities had not ensured Mirta and Luis's separation. Eventually, the various efforts to locate Luis yielded results on Wednesday, November 17, 2021, when he was discovered in the upper area of Coquimbo. He was handed over to justice, facing charges for repeated abuses of a minor. The next day, the defendant was made available to the Court of Guarantees. During the hearing, the prosecution presented further details of the crimes he had committed against Melissa. After hearing the arguments of the prosecution, ordered preventive detention for Luis and his admission to jail, arguing that releasing him posed a danger to society. Meanwhile, on November 29th, the prosecution formally charged Mirta and added a new charge for being an accomplice to the sexual crimes committed by her partner against her daughter. Nearly a year later, on September 23, 2022, the investigation's closing hearing took place. That day, the arguments of the parties to justify continuing the trial highlighted the testimonies of fellow inmates from the penitentiary where Mirta was held in preventive detention. They pointed out that Mirta dedicated all her time to taking care of her appearance and never showed remorse or sadness for how she had acted against her own daughter. They also presented a psychological profile of the accused, indicating to the court that she did not understand empathy but was very familiar with manipulation, as she had provided details and information from the beginning to distort her actions and divert suspicions that arose around her. They stated that Mirta was a person with a preserved reality judgment, aware of the illegality of her acts and the consequences of her actions. This made her culpable as she presented a personality disorder but no loss of contact with reality. Awaiting trial, the regional prosecutor announced he would request life imprisonment for Mirta. For Luis, he would seek a sentence of more than 20 years in prison. On January 21, 2023, just before the trial began, Mirta was urgently transferred from jail to the hospital due to complications from kidney stones. Her hospitalization became public through a photo leaked on social media, prompting criticism from the defense team for the lack of privacy for their client. 3 days after a successful operation, she was discharged and returned to prison. Given the extreme gravity of the events and the fact that they involved a minor, the Child Rights Defense Office requested that the hearings be conducted without media presence. During the last preparatory hearing for the trial, the defense attorney focused on the absence of genetic material to dismiss the accusations against Luis. Ultimately, considering the evidence presented by the public prosecutor's office insufficient, the court dismissed the charges, and instead of preventive detention, Luis was placed under house arrest with a prohibition on leaving the country. Despite this decision, he still had to face a trial. Mirta was not as fortunate. Despite her lawyer's efforts, the highest judicial authority determined she should remain in preventive detention. The trial for Melissa's case took place on April 23, 2023. Presenting a detailed chronology of the events leading to the tragic outcome, the prosecutor asserted that all evidence pointed unequivocally to Mirta, a woman whose jealousy led her to see a rival in her own daughter. To support her case, security camera footage was exhibited in court. The defense criticized what they considered a lack of thoroughness in the investigation, arguing that other leads that could have led to the real culprit and not Mirta were not sufficiently explored. The defense attorneys requested that the court consider their client's substantial cooperation since the beginning of the investigation, initially as witnesses and later as defendants. They proposed a sentence of 10 years for homicide and 5 for arson for Mirta, and a 3-year and 1-day prison sentence for Luis. However, both the public prosecutor and the case advocates opposed all the requests. On May 17, 2023, in a unanimous decision, the court found Luis and Mirta guilty of the charged crimes. Following the verdict, the prosecutors thanked the support of civil society and the entities involved in the investigation, including the experts from the forensic laboratory. On May 27, 2023, the court sentenced Mirta to 33 years in prison, 18 for homicide, and 15 for being the author of a consummated arson. Luis Santander was sentenced to 10 years and 1 day for repeated sexual abuse of Melissa Chavez and was prohibited from engaging in activities involving minors. The case deeply shocked Chilean society, and though the sentences could not reverse the irreparable loss of Melissa and the life she could have had, they brought some consolation to the community with the effective action of the judiciary. In the mid-1990s in Spain, 2 young Romani teenagers, Rosa and Marcelino Vega, defied societal expectations by getting married before reaching legal adulthood. For them and their community, navigating life was already a complex affair. The Romani people, officially termed by the European Union, have been part of Europe for nearly a millennium. As it stands, they are Europe's most significant ethnic minority, numbering between 8 and 10 million. Despite their population size, the Romani continue to face severe challenges, from school segregation and forced relocations to being marginalized into ghettos. They also struggle with restricted employment prospects solely based on their heritage and limited access to healthcare and other essential public services. So far, no resolution from the European Union's governing bodies has managed to effectively address these issues. Yet, despite facing all these adversities, Rosa and Marcelino fell in love and chose to build a life together. Adding another layer of uniqueness to their story, especially from a Western perspective, is the fact that they were cousins. Immaculata had a unique dual relationship with Rosa, being both her aunt and mother-in-law, as well as the matriarch to the 4 other children. In the Romani community from which they hailed, There was a strong focus on keeping unions within the family to preserve their cultural heritage and lineage. Such unions were prioritized over relationships with non-Romani individuals, often referred to as payos. At the tender age of 15, Rosa and Marcelino embarked on the journey of family life. Their first son, Adolfo, arrived swiftly and was marked by his quintessential Romani features, dark skin, and jet black hair. His grandmother affectionately dubbed him Diablo Moreno, or a dark-skinned devil. Shortly thereafter, Jonathan was born. Unlike his brother, he had lighter skin, which made him appear more like a payo. His blue eyes were as luminous as sunlight dancing on the sea, and his unruly blonde locks earned him the lifelong nickname Chucky, reminiscent of the messy-haired doll from the notorious 90s horror movie. The young family shared a humble abode with Immaculata, a small two-room wooden house lacking doors, situated in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in Madrid. This settlement was predominantly composed of extended family members who relied on collective support to navigate their persistent financial struggles. The Vega family, Marcelino's lineage, was an established Romani clan. They had transitioned from agricultural labor to scavenging and selling an assortment of inexpensive goods, from garlic to brass, in a bid to make ends meet. Amid this backdrop of hardship, Rosa and Marcelino received news that they were expecting a third child when Jonathan was still an infant. Their joy, however, was tragically short-lived. On the fateful morning of August 7, 1998, Marcelino, then only 19 years old, died tragically. He was riding in the back seat of a car that crashed at a speed of 200 km/h on a highway near Barcelona, Spain. Shortly after the tragic loss of Marcelino, Rosa gave birth to a daughter whom she named Carmen. Unfortunately, Marcelino was no longer around to hold her in his arms, leaving Rosa as another young Romani mother facing the challenges of raising her children alone. This was the reality for many impoverished Romani families. They neither controlled lucrative antique markets nor were involved in large drug trafficking operations. Along the way, they had also lost the traditional skill of basket weaving, which once provided extra income. Long gone were the days of field work. They had moved to the city to scrape a living from scavenging. Despite these challenges, they aimed to remain united and uphold the traditions that made them feel at home, no matter where they were. Life moved on for Rosa and her children. Fast forward to Saturday, May 27, 2000, past 2 p.m. in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in San Fernando de Henares, Marcelino's birthday was being commemorated. He would have turned 21 that day had he not died in a car accident 2 years prior. As per Romani custom, the birthdays of the deceased are remembered. To mark the occasion, many in the community visited the cemetery to lay flowers and pay their respects. In Romani culture, the life of a departed loved one is celebrated as well as the life that could have been, no matter how short. On that day, children were running around and playing after having finished their meals. The adults were split between various tasks. Some were scavenging for scrap metal to sell, others were resting after lunch, and some had gone to the cemetery for Marcelino's birthday. Among the group of children, all of whom were cousins, was little Jonathan, the middle child of the late Marcelino and Rosa. By that time, he was already 2 years and 8 months old. Jonathan was an energetic and spirited little boy. On that particular day, his 17-year-old Aunt Isabel was looking after him. She took him and a few of his young cousins to a nearby shopping mall called Prica for an outing. They strolled around for a while, enjoying some sweets before opting to capture the moment in a photo booth. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Isabel, upon collecting the booth's photographs, discovered that Jonathan was missing. In a state of alarm, she combed through the Prica Mall, repeatedly entering and exiting, all the while shouting Jonathan's name. Seeing no trace of him, she raced back to their community to rally the family. By the evening, after formally reporting his disappearance to the police, national authorities joined the search efforts, with firefighters getting involved the following morning. Realizing the gravity of the missing child situation, no one took the matter lightly. Even tracking dogs were deployed, but they yielded no clues regarding Jonathan's whereabouts. Officials soon dismissed the idea that Jonathan had simply wandered off and gotten stuck in nearby natural areas or construction debris. Specifically, the under-construction M45 highway, located not far from their settlement, was examined but ruled out as a location where Jonathan might have been. The next day, both print and TV news featured the unsettling story of a Romani child kidnapped in broad daylight from a mall. The news stunned and worried the public, highlighting the urgency and seriousness of the situation. The community and authorities continued their search, hoping for any lead that could bring Jonathan back to his family. In reaction, both Rosa's and Marcelino's families invoked their deep-rooted communal bonds, managing to gather over 200 Romani individuals from various cities like Sevilla, Malaga, Barcelona, Oviedo, and Madrid. Day and night, they combed the areas around Madrid. Although financial resources were limited, they created and posted makeshift flyers at gas stations in the vicinity, but all efforts were in vain. As hours turned into days, desperation escalated. Investigators revisited Prica, the scene of Jonathan's disappearance, and reviewed the available security footage, which unfortunately did not offer any insights due to its outdated technology. A woman who claimed to have been at the mall on that fateful Saturday reported seeing a tall, dark man giving a child, who resembled Jonathan, a bag of sweets before leading him to a children's ride. She later saw them at a cafe, where the man had a beer before departing with the child. However, her account could not be verified. The chief investigator assured everyone that they were treating the case as a high priority and even initiated an international alert via Interpol. Accompanying Jonathan's picture, they provided his description: blue eyes, blonde hair, approximately 3.3 feet tall, around 55 pounds, with milk teeth, dressed in a blue one-piece suit. With no stone left unturned, his family blanketed Madrid with posters featuring Jonathan's image and a contact number. Unfortunately, the numerous calls received were not all sincere or helpful. Numerous theories were considered, yet none provided answers. The concept of abduction became increasingly likely both within the family and from a law enforcement standpoint. One avenue explored was a potential clash between different Romani families. Authorities questioned countless individuals, and the regional government representative at the time, Francisco Xavier Anzurtegui, consulted with heads of Romani families in Madrid. All claimed ignorance about the young boy's disappearance, insisting he wasn't in the hands of any clan. Financial motives were also scrutinized. The family revealed they were awaiting a large insurance payment of 25 million pesetas, approximately $139,000, following Marcelino's death, making it conceivable that someone aimed to claim the money. The family was plagued by anomalous phone calls from a hoarse-voiced man asserting he had Jonathan, yet no demands were made. While police pursued this lead, it yielded no results. Disturbingly, other calls came in featuring the sounds of a child crying, heightening the family's anguish. These calls were later traced back to a psychologically unstable woman who used a doll to simulate the cries. As days passed with no ransom request, the likelihood of a kidnapping for financial reasons waned. After 2 torturous weeks, Jonathan's location remained a mystery. During this period, the non-stop ringing of the household phone escalated their emotional turmoil. Calls came from inquisitive journalists or individuals offering moral support, but no concrete help. Jonathan remained headline news, yet this offered no advantage in finding him. Immaculata, a grandmother of 38, epitomized the challenges faced by the poor Romani community, enduring the heartache of the situation while striving to keep her family's spirits alive in the face of such adversity. Prematurely aged by years of hardship and now further diminished by grief, she nonetheless endeavored to support her niece, Rosa, a young widow with a child missing. Amidst this devastating situation, Rosa attempted to nurse her 15-month-old daughter, Carmen, who was too young to comprehend the tragedy unfolding around her. Rosa was eating poorly and seemed to be withering away from the inside. A report from the newspaper El País depicted their community, Las Castellanas, as a mud-filled hamlet dotted with makeshift dwellings. Home to 50 to 60 families and encircled by emaciated, unresponsive dogs, the settlement presented a bleak picture of life on the margins. In the summer of 2000, Rosa received the insurance settlement from Marcelino's untimely death. Although it brought some financial respite, the 14 million pesetas were less than they initially expected. Committed to finding her missing son, Rosa designated 7 million pesetas as a reward for information that could lead to Jonathan. She spent the remaining money on a van and countless flyers featuring Jonathan's image. Rosa also purchased additional phones to handle potential leads and, accompanied by relatives, began a relentless journey. They traveled throughout Spain and even crossed into France and Portugal in the hopes of locating Jonathan. Regrettably, the search only deepened their sense of loss and despair. At just 21 years old, Rosa pledged to continue the search for her son, even if it meant walking the entire country with only a cane to aid her. As days stretched into months, a grueling 6 months had passed when Rosa's hope for a family reunion was brutally dashed. One evening, while watching television, they heard a breaking news report. A truck driver had stumbled upon skeletal remains not far, about 1.5 kilometers away, from the shopping center where Jonathan had last been seen. Given the closeness, it was feared that the remains could be Jonathan's. The news stunned the tight-knit Romani community and extinguished any lingering hope that the boy would be found alive. Interestingly, the media stated that this particular area had supposedly been scoured in the initial frantic searches for Jonathan. The bones were located near the construction site of Madrid's AIM-45 highway. The truck driver had stopped to assess the site before unloading soil from the construction project. When he saw the small skull, he immediately thought of Jonathan and reported his discovery, even as the soil was being dumped at that location. The police acted swiftly, using heavy machinery to unearth a fractured skull and a few ribs with no obvious marks of violence. Nearby, they discovered children's clothing, a blue overall, a shirt, and a pair of shoes, all faded but intact. Rosa and Jonathan's grandmother identified these garments as the clothes Jonathan was wearing when he disappeared. To the family, it became clear what had tragically occurred. The authorities advised them to wait for conclusive DNA test results for final verification. A week later, the family received confirmation that the discovered remains were indeed Jonathan's. Rosa, his mother, was so overwhelmed by the news that she had to be hospitalized and treated for acute anxiety. The confirmation brought a tragic closure to the long search, leaving the family to grapple with the painful reality of their loss and the need to seek justice for Jonathan. The emotional toll of searching for her son for 6 months culminated in the heartbreaking discovery of his remains. Debate arose about whether the area where the remains were found had been adequately searched earlier. The local security official claimed that this particular stretch had been overlooked because it was beyond the expected radius of where Jonathan might be found. This discrepancy led to differing opinions among the community and authorities. Some thought the remains had been there all along, while others suspected they had been moved recently. A regular forager and the landowner of the area both stated they hadn't noticed anything unusual. Police refrained from speculating how the fragmented skull, lower jaw, and ribs ended up near the construction site. However, the regional governor suggested that the remains might have been brought there by the truck dumping soil for the construction. The family held fast to their belief that Jonathan was criminally taken, asserting that he would never have wandered off by himself. They clarified, however, that they didn't suspect anyone in particular, noting that if they had, they would have enacted their own form of justice in keeping with the Romani code of an eye for an eye. Clarity remained elusive in the case, and forensic analysis of the remains could not ascertain the cause of Jonathan's death. He was laid to rest in a modest white coffin beside his father, in a funeral attended by just over 20 people, all grappling with the unresolved tragedy. Through it all, Rosa was visibly shattered, unable to stop her tears and suffering from multiple collapses. Although the case remains open, police have made no significant progress. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Jonathan's death remain a mystery, lacking both justice and explanation. Tullahoma, Tennessee, might not be the first place you'd think of when you hear about a murder. Yet, in the early morning hours of July 2nd, 2012, a shocking scene unfolded. Around 1:30 a.m., investigators stumbled upon a fire on the side of a secluded road. What they initially thought was a simple blaze turned out to be something far more horrifying: the burning body of a young woman. As soon as the fire was put out, the clues started to add up. They found a woman with star tattoos behind her ears, wearing what remained of a nursing school shirt. She appeared to be in her 20s and was found without clothes from the waist down. The fire had intensely burned her pelvic area, hinting at a sinister act of violence. Megan Sharpton was born on October 24, 1987, in the small American city of Tullahoma, in the state of Tennessee. She grew up in a large and friendly family with 2 sisters and a brother, with whom she got along very well. Her parents strove to give maximum attention to all their children, but Megan was especially close to her mother. From an early age, she helped her parents care for her younger siblings and was always eager to assist friends and family. During high school, Megan decided she wanted to become a nurse, which led her to enroll at Motlow Community College, located about 7 miles from her home. She also worked as a waitress at a local restaurant and eventually moved in with her boyfriend. In the summer of 2012, at the age of 24 and just a few months shy of finishing college, Megan planned to immediately find a job as a nurse. Shortly before her disappearance, she had also started working at a nursing home to gain practical skills in caring for the elderly. Despite her busy life, Megan tried to see her family whenever she could. On July 1st, her sister, who lived in another city, came home, and Megan promised to meet with her. However, that evening, Megan called her mother to say she would be delayed. She had been offered an interesting job opportunity and had arranged an interview for that night. She was excited about this opportunity and promised her mother that she would visit her as soon as the interview was over. According to her, the job involved taking care of an elderly woman. As time passed, there was no word from Megan. She did not respond to messages or calls. Her parents began to worry. They contacted her boyfriend, but he also did not know where Megan was and was unaware of any interview. Despite this, the parents decided not to panic and waited for their daughter to get in touch. At 24, with her schedule packed between her studies and 2 jobs, it was possible she was just busy, but Megan did not show up the next day. Meanwhile, in a remote area several kilometers from the city, around 1:30 a.m., a group of teenagers saw a fire in a field. Given the very hot summer, they thought wildfires might have spread to the grass. They immediately called the firefighters, who arrived at the scene to find an unexpected turn of events. Shortly after beginning to extinguish the flames, they discovered a body at the center of the fire. Once the fire was fully extinguished and the police arrived, they realized they were looking at a dead girl. It was clear that a murder had taken place. However, detectives could not establish the victim's identity immediately, as she had no documents, wallet, or phone with her. Due to the effects of the fire, the features were unrecognizable. The only clues available to detectives were 2 small star-shaped tattoos. The investigation at the crime scene led to the conclusion that the girl was dead before the fire started. The victim suffered a serious head injury that appeared to be fatal. Yet, no clues pointing to the presence of the killer were found. The victim was partially dressed, and from her shirt, the police deduced that the girl might have been a nurse. They also found that there were no missing person reports matching her description, which complicated the identification process. However, news quickly spread throughout the small town. Megan's mother saw a social media post about a young woman found dead in a field with 2 star-shaped tattoos and realized with horror that it was her daughter. Medical examiners eventually confirmed that the deceased was indeed Megan Sharpton. They determined that the cause of death was a bullet wound to the back of the head, supporting the police's theory that she was already dead at the time of the fire. Furthermore, she was killed elsewhere and her body was then moved to the field. She had also been subjected to violence prior to her death, and the experts were able to extract a DNA sample of the criminal. The DNA was immediately checked against the national database, but there were no matches. The detectives began by searching for Megan's car, a red Mustang. She had worked at a restaurant that night and had left in her vehicle. The car was nowhere to be found, indicating that the killer might have taken it somewhere that could yield crucial evidence. While its location remained unknown, the police began to look for potential suspects among Megan's acquaintances. Attention turned to her boyfriend, who became a significant person of interest. Megan's sister immediately expressed her suspicion to the detectives that he was involved in the murder, pointing out that the couple had been having relationship issues. Megan had been with him for 3 years, part of which they spent living together in an apartment they shared with another roommate, but he denied any involvement in the incident. Initially, he claimed that everything was fine between him and Megan, but eventually conceded that their relationship was troubled and heading towards a split. However, he insisted he had no motive for murder and provided an alibi for the time of her death. While the police were verifying his alibi, they decided to search the apartment where Megan and her boyfriend lived. In the bathroom, they found troubling evidence, traces of blood and syringes containing illicit substances. At the same time, 12 miles from the city, police found Megan's abandoned car in a secluded and remote area. There were no documents or phone inside, which meant the perpetrator could have taken or discarded them elsewhere. The police appealed to the public, asking anyone who found such items to contact them immediately. There were no signs of blood or a struggle in the car, but there was an intriguing clue, a note with a non-existent address. Investigators concluded that the unknown assailant had tried to lure Megan to a secluded place to commit the crime. Early in the investigation, they discovered that Megan was preparing for a job interview. However, they had no leads in that direction. One theory was that the person who offered her the job had given her a fake address. When the community learned of the details surrounding the case, a chilling connection was made. 6 months earlier, hundreds of miles from Tullahoma, another young woman of a similar age to Megan had disappeared without a trace. She was also a pharmacy student. which led many to fear that there could be a serial killer in the county. This only heightened the community's anxiety, with concerns that the criminal might strike again. Meanwhile, the police questioned the roommate of Megan and her boyfriend, who admitted to using illicit substances. He claimed that Megan and her boyfriend were unaware of this and that they never partook themselves. Forensic experts analyzed the blood traces found and concluded that they indeed belonged to the roommate. However, the story did not end there. He revealed that Megan and her boyfriend's relationship had in fact ended some time ago, and he himself had recently started a relationship with Megan. He had kept his addiction hidden from her. Knowing this, the police began to suspect both her boyfriend and the roommate. The boyfriend might have harbored resentment towards Megan, and the roommate had a known drug habit, but there was no direct evidence against either of them. During questioning, he claimed he was unaware of the new relationship, and by this time, the police had already verified his alibi. He had been at work at the time of Megan's murder, which excluded him from the list of suspects. As for the roommate, he did not have a solid alibi. However, an analysis of his phone showed that he had been trying to reach Megan throughout the night and had sent her messages trying to find out where she was. Although this was not conclusive proof of his innocence, the police doubted he was the murderer. DNA samples were taken from both men and sent to the lab for analysis, but the results could take months. In the meantime, the detectives found a new lead. In the last interrogation, Megan's boyfriend mentioned he might help the investigation. On the day of Megan's disappearance, an unknown man had called her old phone, which was at home, wanting to speak to her about a job as a caregiver, saying that she had been recommended by someone named Naomi. He mentioned that Megan had spoken several times of a fellow student with that name, but he knew no further details. Police began searching among the students at Motlow College and soon found a student by that name. When detectives obtained her address, Naomi was not at home. Neighbors provided Naomi's phone number to the police. Naomi was surprised by the police call and claimed she barely knew Megan, having only met her in a few classes and never speaking much. Naomi insisted that she had not recommended Megan for any job and that Megan had bothered her, so she certainly wouldn't have helped her. The police were disappointed that this promising lead didn't yield further information, but they still had more substantial evidence to consider. Investigators handed over the phone, which had received the call about the job, and they had the caller's number in their possession. Experts determined that the call was made from a prepaid phone, making it impossible to establish the owner's name. However, the police traced the device back to the store where it was sold, which had a surveillance camera facing the checkout counter. Upon reviewing the footage from the day the phone was purchased, they immediately identified the buyer. From these images, the police inferred that the individual was purchasing the phone for some illicit purpose. Prepaid phones are popular among those involved in criminal activities in the United States because they do not require personal information for activation, and this person, seen taking out his own phone from his pocket at some point, indicated he was buying an additional phone for suspect purposes. There was also a camera pointing at the parking lot in the store. The police saw the buyer exit the building and get into his car, which soon led to establishing his identity. It turned out to be Timothy Gifford, who had an impressive criminal history. However, his activities were limited to minor drug dealings and he had not been implicated in serious offenses. They soon tracked him down and brought him into the station. He said he bought the phone not for himself, but for a 37-year-old acquaintance named Donnie Jones, who was recuperating from surgery and couldn't pick up the phone himself. In exchange for this favor, Donnie gave Timothy some illegal pills. The detectives were familiar with Donnie, who also had an impressive criminal history, but often acted as an informant for the police. Despite this, no connection between Donnie and Megan was found until Timothy revealed something else. Donnie wanted to trade his van for a Mustang and asked for help with the exchange. Timothy found this request odd since Donnie had 2 young children, and the Mustang isn't exactly known as a family car. Nevertheless, he agreed to try to find a buyer. Donnie handed over the van, and Timothy noticed that inside the old vehicle, there were brand new carpets and seat covers. Donnie explained that his wife told him that the chance of selling the car was much higher with a renovated interior, and here is where the police suddenly discovered something that excited them and connected all the parts of the story. Donnie turned out to be the husband of Naomi, the same woman who supposedly recommended Megan for the job. At that point, the detectives realized they were getting closer to a solution. Unfortunately for them, the man's DNA was not in the database because he had not been convicted of violent crimes. They immediately went to Donnie and Naomi's house to talk to them. At first, the man said he did not know Megan, but after a few minutes he mentioned that he had driven her and Naomi to college several times. This seemed odd compared to Naomi's statements a week earlier. At that time, she claimed that she barely knew Megan and that they hardly spoke and did not get along in general. However, during a second conversation, the woman finally admitted that her husband indeed had driven Megan occasionally. However, Donnie firmly insisted on his innocence. According to him, on the night of the murder, he was at home with his children, allowed the police to search his home without a warrant, and voluntarily provided a DNA sample. He also denied having asked Timothy to buy a prepaid phone for him. In the house, the police found no clues and could only wait for the DNA test results, which could also take months. By then, 2 months had passed since the murder. Megan's parents received her nursing diploma posthumously. People hoped the police would capture the heartless monster as soon as possible, someone who could kill again at any moment. Finally, the laboratory results showed a complete match between Donnie's DNA and the sample found on Megan's body. He was immediately taken to the station, but he continued to insist on his innocence. Upon learning about the DNA match, he changed his story and told detectives that he and Megan had a secret relationship that he had hidden from his wife. According to him, that was why he hadn't mentioned it before. The police considered his story to be obviously fabricated, but they had to release him since there was no concrete evidence other than the DNA, and it was impossible to find 100% proof that would refute Donnie's words. Thus, the detectives were almost certain that the man was the killer, but they needed more evidence. Although they couldn't charge him with murder, they managed to detain him. During a search of his car, they found a firearm he was not allowed to possess due to his criminal record. While in custody, the police had time to look for more evidence. They didn't have to worry about Donnie attacking someone else or escaping. Soon, experts determined that Megan was shot with a weapon of the same caliber as Donnie's rifle. The detectives obtained a warrant to track his phone and check his movements on the night of Megan's murder. They compared those data with the movements of a prepaid phone that Donnie supposedly never owned. Here, the police had a significant breakthrough. The prepaid phone was close to Donnie's phone and followed the same route on the night of the crime. The detectives identified several key locations where Megan was supposedly abducted, where she was killed, and the field where her body was found. At all these locations, both phones were in proximity. Donnie's family owned several farms around Tullahoma. According to the investigation, after abducting her, Donnie took Megan to one of them, subjected her to violence, and killed her. The detectives obtained a search warrant and found a significant clue, a partially burnt bandana that turned out to belong to Megan. Her sister had given her that item. This evidence, combined with Megan's clothing and the DNA match, was enough to bring the case to trial. On November 5th, Donnie was charged with murder. At the trial, new details emerged that only strengthened the case against him. Reviewing his phone, experts discovered many interesting things. It turned out that Donnie had attempted several times to contact other women, offering them jobs as caregivers, but all those attempts failed. According to the investigation's version, Donnie found Megan's phone number on his wife's contact list. He contacted her, telling her that Naomi had recommended her as a caregiver. She agreed, and the man gave her a non-existent address, leading her to a remote location. There, he attacked her, took her to a farm, subjected her to violence, and killed her. Then he took her to a field and burned her. The final touch was the complete replacement of the carpets and seat covers of the pickup he used to transport her body. Apparently, the man feared that he could not completely eliminate certain blood traces and that the police would discover them. As for Naomi, the police concluded that she had no connection with the murder and knew nothing about it. That night, she was working, which was confirmed by numerous pieces of evidence. During the trial, Donnie declared his innocence, and everyone braced themselves for a potentially long process. However, when he realized that the prosecution would seek the death penalty, he decided to make a deal with the investigators. He agreed to forego the death sentence in exchange for a confession. As a result, he pleaded guilty to the murder of Megan and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nevertheless, after some time, he claimed that he had made the deal under pressure and demanded a review of the case. When the judge accepted his request, he quickly reverted to his previous decision to plead guilty, since a new review would again consider the death penalty. During the trial, it was also explained why the criminal, without any doubt, willingly provided detectives with his DNA sample. He apparently hoped that the fire would destroy all traces, so the police would simply have nothing to compare his sample to, but he was mistaken. With all this, investigators concluded that Donnie probably had no connection to the disappearance of another student who vanished 6 months before Megan. More suitable suspects emerged in that case, and Donnie's candidacy was no longer considered. After the announcement of the verdict, Megan's sister stated that the offender would continue preying on young women and could have taken many more lives, but Megan stopped him by becoming his victim. And ultimately, what makes this story even more tragic is that in November 2013, Megan's mother, who had been doing everything possible to help the police catch her daughter's killer, took her own life. She couldn't bear the devastating loss caused by a cold-hearted criminal. Looking at Donnie's background, it is clear that he could have been apprehended much earlier. Among his numerous offenses was the kidnapping of a young woman, but on that occasion he managed to avoid punishment, and the criminal remained at large. Who knows? Perhaps Megan was not his first victim, but the police have yet to confirm this. Today, we'll dive into the story of Vincent Gillis, a boy with bright blue eyes who transformed into something monstrous. But what goes on in the mind of a psychopath? Scientists have been trying to crack this mystery for years. Research suggests that psychopaths aren't necessarily more intelligent or misguided geniuses. They're average in terms of cognitive ability, but their emotional and reward systems don't function properly. This means they find pleasure and passion in actions that most people find appalling. Studies have also shown that psychopaths tend to have lower brain activity in emotional situations, like when experiencing fear or seeing someone else threatened. Essentially, they barely react when someone else is in danger. Two major factors play a crucial role in turning someone into a killer: their biological traits and their cultural environment. This includes their upbringing and social relationships. Despite these insights, it's important to note that not all psychopaths commit crimes or become murderers. Psychopaths generally believe they are above the law and are fully aware of their actions. They aren't victims of an illness. Sean Vincent Gillis appeared quite normal on the outside. Despite some early signs of violence, No one could have predicted what he was capable of as an adult. He turned into a whirlwind of crime and violence that lasted over a decade. Sean was born on June 24, 1962, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, USA. His parents are Yvonne and Norman Gillis. His father struggled with alcoholism and mental health issues. Around the time of Sean's birth, a disturbing incident occurred that impacted the family deeply. Norman pointed a gun at the baby's head. After this, he decided to leave the family, fearing he might harm his son and wife. Norman drifted in and out of various mental health institutions and lost contact with his family. Sean was raised in southern Louisiana by his mother, with the support of his paternal grandparents. His mother worked full-time at a local TV station and often called Sean her little blue-eyed angel. According to Yvonne, Sean was a quiet, well-behaved child with average grades who enjoyed playing with model cars and got along well with other kids. When Sean was 10, he and his mother moved to another local neighborhood. Some neighbors thought Sean was a bit rough with other children. They lived in a small ranch-style house in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood. Sean attended Catholic schools where he met one of his best friends, John Green. John found Sean to be very intelligent, respectful towards adults, and humorous. In 8th grade, another boy, John Rosas, joined their close-knit group. They hung out together, going to the movies, the mall, or each other's houses. As they grew older, they got into some minor trouble, including a phase where they dabbled in Satanism. They encountered people involved in such rituals and enjoyed the thrill of being scared. They also smoked marijuana together, which Sean seemed to enjoy more than the others. During his teens, Sean's more violent side began to emerge, with episodes of uncontrollable anger recurring repeatedly. Once, a neighbor, Caroline, heard loud banging at 3 in the morning. Looking outside, she saw Sean mercilessly beating some trash cans in her yard. He also expressed frustration to another neighbor about not having a girlfriend. Caroline described him as an angry young man prone to fits of rage, a side of Sean his mother never saw. At 17, Sean faced the death of his paternal grandfather, which led him to see his father for the first time since being abandoned as a baby. This reunion began the development of a relationship between father and son. Around this age, Sean also started his criminal record with minor infractions. Over the years, he was arrested for traffic violations, driving under the influence, possession of marijuana, and contempt of court. At 18, Sean discovered photos owned by his father that depicted men in various sexual positions, revealing his father's homosexuality, a fact that Sean found difficult to accept. By then, Norman had joined Alcoholics Anonymous to address his addiction. After high school, Sean attended various community technical institutes and juggled low-paying jobs while still living with his mother. One of his main jobs was at a convenience store chain. He eventually graduated from a community school with a degree in computer science. When Sean turned 30, his mother moved to Atlanta for a job offer. Refusing to move with her, Sean stayed behind, living alone for the first time in his mother's house. He soon felt lonely and became so obsessed with pornography that he began neglecting his jobs. His mother continued to send him money to help with financial difficulties. However, he was very angry with her for moving away and would sometimes scream in anger. Neighbors reported that he often lay on the grass at night, shouting loudly at the moon, including obscenities directed at his mother. In 1992, he was caught peeping through a neighbor's window as his obsession with pornography grew. In 1994, he met Terry, a girl who worked in a store, and they began dating. Her best friend introduced them, highlighting their shared interests in science fiction, the TV series Star Trek, and collecting memorabilia. To her, Sean was like a teddy bear, someone you'd bring home to meet your mother. While Terry didn't find Sean extraordinary, she valued his kindness and thoughtfulness. The only downside for her was his fondness for drinking. After their first date, a peculiar incident occurred. During an argument, Terry slapped him and Sean started crying. She immediately reassured him that it wouldn't happen again. After overcoming this incident, they established a stable relationship and moved in together into Sean's house a year later. Terry mentioned that Sean didn't believe in sex. He once told her that he had been taught it was something unpleasant and to be avoided. The same year he met his girlfriend, Sean began a crime spree that lasted nearly a decade. This softly spoken, seemingly intelligent man claimed he started killing due to stress. On March 21, 1994, he committed his first murder. He entered the St. James Place, a prestigious retirement home in Baton Rouge located across from where he worked. Around 3 in the morning, he managed to get inside when a nurse left the door unlocked. His victim was Ann Bryan, an 82-year-old woman. He attempted to assault her but froze when she screamed as he touched her. Losing control, he silenced her by stabbing and slashing her with a household knife he always carried. The ferocity of the stabs was such that he nearly decapitated the elderly woman. This crime shocked the Baton Rouge community. Meanwhile, Sean's obsession with pornography led him to websites displaying abuse and mutilation of women. He even once showed his girlfriend a picture of a deceased woman from one of these sites. She didn't pay much attention to it and continued their relationship, unaware of the depths of his depravity. Despite the brutality of his first murder, it took another 5 years before Sean killed again, and then the number of victims rapidly increased. He later confessed to a reporter that the pause was because he felt content during that time. On January 4, 1999, Catherine Ann Hall, a 29-year-old prostitute and drug addict living in a state housing project known for drug dealers and prostitution on North Street, became his second victim. She got into his car after he said he wanted her services. Once inside, he restrained her with a plastic zip tie. She tried to escape, but Sean grabbed and stabbed her. He struck her with the knife 16 times in total. After that, he removed her clothes and mutilated her body. Finally, he dumped her body in a secluded area. The next day, a squirrel hunter found her body lying face down on a rural road. For the police, it was a particularly macabre scene. She was positioned in a sort of ballet pose next to a dead-end street sign, a grim and sick joke indicating that the investigators were at a dead end. Months later, in May 1999, came the third victim. Sean began stalking a woman he had seen jogging in the southern metropolitan area of Baton Rouge. Her name was Hardy Schmidt, a 52-year-old married woman with 3 children, well known in her community. She loved running and had once participated in the Boston Marathon. For 3 weeks, Sean drove around the area looking for her. Around 5:30 a.m. on Sunday, May 30th, 1999, he finally saw her jogging along an avenue. Sean hit her with his white Chevy Cavalier as she jogged, knocking her into a ditch. He quickly got out of the car, forced her inside, placed a sturdy plastic zip tie around her neck, and drove to a park on Highland Road, where he assaulted her before killing her. He then put her body in the trunk of his car, where it stayed until 2 days later when he noticed a bad smell coming from the car, prompting him to dump her body in a swamp in a rural parish far from Baton Rouge. A cyclist eventually found her body. From then on, Sean committed seemingly unconnected murders, which prevented authorities from even realizing they were happening. He mercilessly murdered women by strangling them with a plastic zip tie after assaulting them. He would often cut them up, dismembering them, a dark and utterly evil practice. On November 12, 1999, he claimed his fourth victim, Joyce Williams, a 36-year-old prostitute. He took her to a sugarcane field beside the Mississippi River and strangled her with a plastic zip tie. Then he took her to his house to complete his gruesome ritual, and for the first time, he consumed the human flesh of a victim. After the murder, he left the body in the trunk of his car and went to pick up his girlfriend from work. Later that night, he dumped the body in a secluded area. It was not found until a month later. His next victim was Lillian Robinson, another 52-year-old prostitute whom he attacked in January 2000. He repeated his usual method and took her to his house, but he did not have time to finish because his girlfriend would soon be home from work. However, he did commit necrophilia. He then abandoned her body in the largest swamp in the United States, located in central southern Louisiana. In March, almost 2 months later, the corpse was discovered by some fishermen. In October, 38-year-old prostitute Marilyn Nevels became his next victim. He killed her in the same way as the others, and after bringing the body to his house, he showered with it before leaving it on top of a levee, unhidden about 3 miles from his home near the Mississippi River. The decomposing body was found on October 31st by a man walking in the woods. Sean did not kill again until October 2003, 3 years later, when he took the life of 45-year-old Johnny Mae Williams. He picked up a divorced mother of 3 who was also a prostitute and drug addict. Sean knew her well as she had cleaned his house several times over about 10 years. He took her to a remote area where he beat, abused, and strangled her, then mutilated her body with a knife. He took her hands as a souvenir. He left the body exposed on top of an embankment after positioning it in various poses to take photographs. When it was found, the body was so mutilated that East Baton Rouge's police commented that it was barely recognizable as a human being. Her legs had numerous cuts on the front and back. Despite finding the bodies of his victims, no weapons, witnesses, or current fingerprints were ever found. The police had no leads that could direct them to the killer, which left Sean free to continue his dark deeds. 2 serial criminals were operating in the area. In 2003, after nearly 11 years since his first crime, Sean's luck began to change. On May 27, 2003, Derek Todd Lee, another serial killer active in the Baton Rouge metropolitan area who had taken the lives of 7 women since 1992, was arrested. Sean admired this criminal, even keeping newspaper clippings about his crimes, aspiring to surpass him. With Lee's capture, the police started paying closer attention to unresolved cases involving women. When some of these crimes could not be linked to Derek, investigators began to suspect that another serial killer might have been operating simultaneously. Then, in February 2004, Sean committed what would be his 8th and final murder. He killed 43-year-old Donna Bennett Johnston, who had become a prostitute due to her drug addiction. She was heavily intoxicated, making it easy for him to lure her into his car. He took her to a secluded spot near his house. Unable to defend herself, Donna was abused and then strangled with a plastic wrap, like his previous victims. According to Sean, she became unconscious within seconds and then died. Her last words were, "I can't breathe." After killing her, he placed the body on the grass, removed all her clothes, and mutilated her body horrifically, committing cannibalism and cutting out a butterfly tattoo she had. Donna's body was discovered on February 27, 2004, in a canal south of Louisiana State University. It was, for many, Sean's most gruesome and sordid murder. Crucially, Donna had fought against her attacker, as evidenced by the DNA found under the nails of her right hand. Unfortunately, there was no match in the police records, but it was the same DNA found on 2 other bodies previously discovered, those of Catherine Ann Hall and Johnny Mae Williams. However, A tire print found near Donna's body proved to be Sean's undoing, and a stroke of luck for the investigators, who had until then had little to go on in the case. The police established a special task force to thoroughly investigate the deaths of Donna, Johnny, and Catherine, along with other similar unsolved murders. Highly specialized experts were dedicated to this effort. Detectives took photos and made casts of the Goodyear tire tracks, which were fortunately quite distinct. These tracks were linked to a unique set of tires, and Louisiana's State Crime Lab was able to determine their make, model, and type. They further narrowed down the possibilities when they discovered that this particular tire was only manufactured over a 3-year period that ended in 2003. Only 200 of these tires were sold in the Baton Rouge metropolitan area. Local authorities collaborated with Goodyear stores to track down those who had purchased this particular type of tire in the area. Investigators then conducted DNA tests on these individuals, including Sean. The aim was to compare their DNA samples with the evidence found on one of the victims' bodies. On April 28, 2004, it was Sean's turn to provide his DNA sample for the test. He was the 26th person on the list of buyers. A police agent questioned him at his home to request the sample, which Sean provided without any issue. However, his responses raised suspicions. He mentioned knowing Johnny because she had cleaned his house several times. He also explained that his vehicle's tire tracks were found near where Donna's body was discovered because he had stopped there to urinate. Lastly, he made a bizarre comment about finding blood in his car, claiming it was from a time when Johnny had a heavy menstrual period while he was driving her somewhere. The detective was convinced he was dealing with the right man, but had to let him go that night while waiting for the DNA test results. Eventually, the test confirmed the detective's suspicions. He was indeed the murderer. The following day, April 29, 2004, a special task force returned to the house and arrested Sean for murder. As he was being handcuffed, he looked at Terry and simply said, "I'm sorry." One of the officers approached Terry and asked if she knew she had been living with a serial killer. Her world collapsed that night. Sean had been her partner for 9 years. It was unbelievable what was happening. Later that same day, Sean confessed to his crimes while the police executed a search warrant at his house, leading to astonishing discoveries. Detectives found 45 digital photographs on his computer that showed the mutilated body of Donna, as well as the corpse in the trunk of his car. They also uncovered photos of other victims. The authorities seized 8 saws, including one for cutting metal, several knives, a machete, plastic zip ties, a 14-inch bayonet, a wooden bludgeon, 6 pocket-sized Playboy magazines, and newspaper clippings about Derek Lee's last victim. One of his computers also contained files on murders and necrophilia. Additionally, several books on both fiction and nonfiction about serial killers were confiscated. Sean confessed to his murders with a mix of pride and sadness for what he had done. He expressed regret for deceiving people, but admitted he would do it again, and that if released, he would find someone before nightfall.
I'm sorry I hurt people, but I would do it again.
In May 2004, FBI agents interviewed Sean. His darkest side emerged. During the conversation, he told the officials that he was playing a chess game with them as they investigated each of the crime scenes. He used TV news to strategize his next move and assess whether he was winning the game. He claimed he was the chess master then and they would never win. His main interest was whether they found the body, where, and in what condition. He then explained to the agents how he used a combination of charm and money to lure his victims into his vehicle. He recounted how the prostitutes loved him because he treated them with respect, like ladies, even though he had no specific plan or agenda on when or where he would kill his next victim. It all depended on when the opportunity presented itself. However, he always paid close attention to when and where to dispose of the bodies. One of the most striking aspects of this case was how Sean successfully hid his double life from his partner. He made sure to pick her up after work, and she never suspected a thing. Once, she noticed a bad smell coming from the trunk of the car, and he told her it was a dead animal that had hit his car. He cleaned the vehicle immediately. Another time, Terry noticed the car's mileage increasing rapidly due to the trips John made to find his victims and then dispose of the bodies. However, she only suspected that he might be cheating on her with another woman. Terry had to hear it from John himself to believe what the police were saying. She asked him if he did it, and he admitted it and expressed his regret. Sean was charged with his crimes at different times as investigators worked to find evidence that would support his confession to the murders. For example, the police had no idea about the crime committed against Marilyn Nevels. Marilyn had been missing for 4 years, a fact Sean confessed to. Her disappearance had never been reported. Meanwhile, the crime lab continued to search the house for traces of blood, bones, and tissues. This led them to realize that Sean had kept some parts of his dismembered victims' bodies in his house as souvenirs. The photographs helped him relive the murders. It was determined that he had consumed the flesh of his victims, committed necrophilia with the corpses, and even showered with one of the dead bodies and painted the nails of the hands he had mutilated. In the aftermath of Sean's arrest, a friend of Donna, his last victim for over a decade, sent a letter to the criminal. He responded with several letters in which he expressed some remorse for the murders he committed, especially for mutilating the bodies. He mentioned that he didn't talk much with Donna and that sex was not his intention. He described that night as one filled with pure evil, devoid of compassion, faith, mercy, or hope. He blamed his lack of faith and his long-standing hatred towards God. He admitted he didn't really understand what came over him and confessed that even 10 years earlier, he could never have imagined harming anyone. He described it as a mystery why he did those things to the corpse, and something deep in his subconscious told him he needed those macabre actions. He also stated that sometimes he committed the murders without knowing what he was doing. In another part of the letter, he expressed deep regret for killing those women. In the end, he showed repentance and stated he did not want to die, but that was up to the Almighty. He also declared his love for his family, now realizing he truly loved them, that God loved him, and he loved God. Donna's friend passed away in 2005 from complications related to AIDS, but before her death, she handed over Sean's letters to the prosecutors, which were used in the trials against him to demonstrate his culpability for the crimes. Initially, Sean was tried for the murder of Joyce Williams. During the trial, Sean's girlfriend testified that he confessed the crime to her because he needed to make things right with God. In 2007, after years of judicial delays, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for that crime. The following year, on July 21, 2008, in a unanimous verdict, he was found guilty of the murders of 3 more of his victims. This moved the trial into the sentencing phase. The defense brought a doctor to the stand who testified that Sean exhibited signs of schizoaffective disorder, arguing that he should not be considered mentally capable. Relatives of the victims also testified. Lauren Williams, the daughter of Johnny Mae Williams, confronted him from the stand and asked why he did it. He shrugged and simply said, "I'm sorry." But she did not believe in his repentance. On July 31st at 3:03 p.m., the jury began deliberations on what Sean's sentence should be. At 5:45 p.m., they returned to the courtroom without having reached an agreement on the prosecution's request for the death penalty. As a result, Sean was sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor without the possibility of parole. Later, in 2013, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and received another life sentence for the deaths of Ann Bryan and Hardy Schmidt. He was incarcerated in the Louisiana State Penitentiary, where he remains to this day. No one knows for sure what stirred in Sean's subconscious, and it seems there may never be an answer. But one shocking revelation came when the district attorney questioned him, and he admitted he would have liked to have had relations with his mother. His mother's departure to another city, leaving him on his own, unleashed a rage that no one could have imagined, leading to the most horrifying murders. What's most disturbing is that despite growing up without his father, Sean was a love child and never showed signs of being capable of such atrocities. Over time, perhaps because he had evaded suspicion for so many years, he began to display the bodies of his victims openly, as if they were his sinister trophies. Moreover, he knew how to choose his victims, hunting for prostitutes, drug addicts, and anyone willing to get into his car, people who had no one to miss them, the outcasts of society. However, he also included at least 2 individuals from better economic backgrounds, which helped him avoid sticking too closely to a single pattern. His confidence in not being caught, thinking he was winning the chess game against the police, underscores the narcissistic, grandiose, and egomaniacal character of this serial killer. The interviews in which he revealed his crimes are chilling, as they showed a man speaking calmly about heinous acts, without a tremor in his voice. It seemed as if he wanted to shout it from the rooftops to let everyone know he was pure evil. For those who knew them, Jordan Graham and Cody Johnson appeared to have a perfect relationship, especially after their picturesque wedding on June 29, 2013. However, shortly after the celebration, Jordan's demeanor began to change dramatically. Friends noticed she became increasingly distressed, a shift that a close acquaintance attributed to her fear of consummating the marriage. Just a week and a day following their nuptials, Jordan and Cody went for a hike along a cliff in Glacier National Park, not far from Jordan's hometown of Kalispell, Montana. Jordan returned from the hike alone, and the next day, Cody was reported missing. Initially, Jordan told friends and authorities that Cody had gone out with friends, leaving many questions unanswered. As the days passed and the investigation deepened, the weight of the evidence began to reveal the stark reality of the situation. Cody Johnson was born on a sunny day, April 8, 1989, in the bustling city of San Jose, California. He had a close bond with his mother, Sherry Johnson, which defined much of his early life. In 2002, they packed up and moved to Kalispell, a charming little tourist spot nestled in the scenic Flathead Valley of northwestern Montana. This town lies cozily between a shimmering lake, also named Flathead, and the majestic peaks of Glacier National Park. Cody was a true adventurer at heart, spending his days exploring the wild, vast outdoors, sometimes cruising down long, winding trails with his buddies. It was during these youthful escapades that he kindled a deep, enduring passion for cars, a hobby that soon turned into much more. Those who knew Cody described him as the real deal, charismatic, warm-hearted, and always ready to lend a hand. He was the kind of friend who didn't think twice about going out of his way for someone he cared about. As he grew older, Cody turned his childhood car obsession into a flourishing career. He started small, tweaking and enhancing cars for racing during his teen years. Over time, this hobby evolved into a full-blown business dealing with commercial vehicles. Aside from his automotive pursuits, Cody also worked at Nomad Communications, where he teamed up with his uncle and a crew of car enthusiast friends. It was a bonus that his childhood best friend, Cameron Fredrickson, was also his boss, making work feel a lot like hanging out with friends. Life was almost perfect for Cody. The only thing he felt he was missing was someone special to share it with. At the age of 23, he was ready to settle down. He often talked about finding a church girl to marry, and then on Halloween 2011, he met Jordan Lynn Graham. Jordan was born in August 1991 and had spent her entire life in Kalispell. Raised in a deeply religious family, her life revolved around her faith. She was a regular at Faith Baptist Church, where she helped care for children and supported local families. Jordan dreamed of one day being a stay-at-home mom, raising a family in the faith that meant so much to her. When Jordan and Cody met, there was an instant connection, although Jordan was quite shy initially. As they chatted, she shared her dreams of family life and her love for the outdoors. Cody was smitten. Jordan found him intriguing too, but at 20, she wasn't quite ready to jump into a serious relationship. They went on a few dates and decided to remain friends for now. Everything took a new turn when Cody decided to win Jordan's heart for good. He started by joining her church, First Baptist, and began mingling in the same social circles she did. This marked the beginning of a transformation from their casual friendship to a more serious relationship, at least from Cody's perspective. By November 2011, they were officially a couple, and Cody was completely smitten with Jordan. He was so in love that he wanted to spend every possible moment with her. His mother, Sherry, remarked that just a few weeks into their dating, Cody was already sure he wanted to marry Jordan, even after she expressed her wish to remain chaste until marriage. His feelings remained unchanged. However, those who knew them both could sense that Jordan's feelings weren't as intense as Cody's. Some thought her reserved nature might be the reason, but others suspected the relationship was somewhat unbalanced. They rarely showed affection in public, like holding hands or flirting, which raised eyebrows among their friends. Despite the doubts, Jordan accepted Cody's marriage proposal in December 2012, which surprised many of her friends who felt she wasn't quite ready for marriage. Yet, they were happy for her when she excitedly announced her engagement on Instagram, calling it the best early Christmas present ever. The wedding was set for June 29, 2013, and planning began in earnest with both Cody and Jordan's best friend, Kimberly, playing significant roles. Jordan, in particular, threw herself into the preparations and even performed a song at the wedding, written by a professional songwriter. The lyrics of the song would later seem eerily foreboding. As the wedding day approached, Jordan's apprehensions grew. She repeatedly questioned her decision to marry Cody, confiding in Kimberly whether she was making the right choice. On the day of the wedding, her anxiety was palpable. She seemed reluctant to make eye contact with Cody. Her gaze often directed downward, revealing the turmoil she felt about the step they were about to take. After the wedding ceremony, Jordan managed to put on a brave face for the wedding photos and even seemed genuinely present during their first dance. It looked like she was finally warming up to the moment, focusing all her attention on Cody. But this apparent happiness was short-lived. The very next day, from their honeymoon hotel, Jordan sent a distressed text to her friend. She confessed that she had not consummated the marriage and had rebuffed Cody each night. She expressed dread over the expectations of intimacy, texting, "I just know he's going to want to do stuff, and I'm not really wanting to." In another message, she hinted at using excuses about her period to avoid intimacy, fearing the consequences if forced into a situation she was uncomfortable with. Jordan's deep-rooted fear of intimacy stemmed partly from her religious beliefs and partly from her unresolved feelings towards Cody. She was terrified at the thought of being physically close to him. The tension in their relationship escalated until July 7th, a week after their wedding. Although Cody was supposed to spend the day golfing with friends, he canceled to spend time with Jordan, which included church and some quiet time by the lake. Later, they joined friends for dinner at a local Dairy Queen. That evening, after returning home with Jordan, Cody vanished. His absence was first noticed the next day by his close friend and co-worker Cameron, who found it unusual for Cody, a punctual and dependable employee, to not show up for work. Concerned, Cameron went to the new house Cody had recently purchased with Jordan. After repeatedly knocking with no response, he let himself in, but found the house empty and unsettlingly quiet. His concern turned to alarm when he discovered Cody's phone in the garage, an unusual oversight for someone who always carried it with him. This was a clear red flag for Cameron, indicating that something serious might have happened. Cameron's frantic calls to friends and family confirmed that no one had seen Cody since the dinner at Dairy Queen around 8:30 p.m. the previous night. The mystery of Cody's whereabouts deepened, and the worry among his friends and family grew. Cameron rushed to the police station to report Cody missing, and the seriousness of his concern prompted the authorities to act immediately. One of the first police officers to interview Cameron found it odd that Cody's boss reported him missing, not his wife, Jordan. Later that day, Kimberly, a close friend of the couple, managed to reach Jordan to ask about Cody's disappearance. Jordan explained that after they had left the restaurant, Cody received a phone call that seemed to upset him. She said she gave him space to cool off. Later, when she went to the garage to fetch her phone charger from their car, she saw him leaving with some friends in a black car. She recounted receiving a text from Cody saying he was going out for a ride with some visiting friends. When questioned by the police, Jordan reiterated her story and added that she didn't recognize the men with Cody. She insisted they hadn't argued that night and suggested Cody was likely out having fun with his friends. She defended her decision not to report him missing immediately, explaining she didn't want to cause unnecessary alarm if he was just out for a few hours. However, 48 hours after Cody's disappearance, tension rose during a gathering at the family home. Friends and family were baffled by Cody's uncharacteristic behavior, disappearing without telling anyone where he was going, particularly so soon after his wedding. Despite the growing doubts, Jordan maintained her story. The atmosphere grew more strained, and during an intense discussion, Jordan became so agitated that she threw her wedding ring across the room. While some saw this as a strange way to cope, Kimberly sensed something more troubling. Kimberly called her friend to discuss her suspicions after leaving the gathering. The next day, the police called Jordan in for further questioning due to the inconsistencies in her accounts. The situation intensified as they tried to piece together Cody's whereabouts and understand the events leading up to his mysterious disappearance. The investigation into Cody's disappearance intensified when the detective confronted Jordan about inconsistencies in her story. The detective had spoken to several people and stressed the importance of Jordan being truthful, hinting that there was likely more to her story than she was admitting. Meanwhile, Cody's mother brought the police his phone records from the day he vanished, hoping they might reveal something about his last known activities. One of the calls was to a friend about returning a borrowed tool, but this lead quickly fizzled out. The friend had an alibi. His wife was in labor at the time of Cody's disappearance, clearing him of any suspicion. With no new leads and their options running thin, the police's focus returned to Jordan, whose account was becoming increasingly dubious. On July 10th, Graham reported to police that she had received a suspicious email from an account named Carmantony607, confirming her husband's death. The email read, "My name is Tony. There is no bother looking for Cody anymore. He is gone. I saw your post on Twitter and thought I would email you. He had come with some buddies and met up with me on Sunday night in Columbia Falls. He was saying he needed to be with his buddies for a bit and take them for a joyride. 3 of the guys came back saying that they had gone for a ride in the woods somewhere, and Cody got out of the car and went for a little hike, and they are positive he fell and he is dead, Jordan. I don't know who the guys were, but they took off, so call off the missing persons report. Cody is gone for sure. Tony. Jordan showed this message to one of her friends, displaying no emotion as she explained that according to the email, Cody had accidentally fallen off a cliff in Glacier National Park while with friends. The friend, who was horrified by the message and the lack of reaction from Jordan, urged her to take the email to the police immediately. She was shaken, frantically pushing Jordan to act, exasperated by her passive demeanor. Despite Jordan eventually going to the police with the email, it didn't provide the closure they hoped for. Instead, the mysterious message only deepened the investigators' suspicions, driving them to probe even further into the puzzling circumstances surrounding Cody's disappearance. One of the detectives found the timing and content of the email too convenient, but what troubled him even more was Jordan's unemotional reaction to the news of her husband's presumed death. Despite the dubious email, Jordan organized a trip to Glacier National Park with her friends and family to look for Cody. Hannah, one of the friends on the trip, noted Jordan's oddly cheerful demeanor during the drive, describing her as carefree, even sticking her hand out of the window as they drove. Their initial search yielded no results, but on the second day, Jordan insisted on leading the group to a specific overlook despite alternative suggestions. She claimed to have a strong feeling about this particular location. Once there, they parked at the top of a loop trail known for its steep ascent to a 200-foot cliff that towers over a deep ravine. With a sureness that seemed rehearsed, Jordan quickly made her way to the edge of the cliff, peering intently into the ravine below. She casually tossed a rock down and speculated, "I think he's down there." Her emotionless demeanor at such a dramatic moment raised eyebrows. It required the daring efforts of an FBI agent who secured himself to a tree to lean over the precipice, along with the assistance of multiple emergency service teams and a helicopter to finally locate and retrieve a body at the bottom of the ravine. The body was identified as Cody Johnson, a beloved local businessman and car enthusiast. The idea that Cody could have accidentally ventured into such a dangerous area seemed implausible. The coroner later confirmed that the injuries sustained were consistent with a fall, noting significant damage to Cody's head and arms. While Cody's friends and family were overwhelmed with grief, Jordan appeared to be relieved by the discovery. This only fueled suspicions, as now the police's investigation might be curtailed with the recovery of the body. However, the identity of the person behind the email remained a mystery. Jordan suggested the police look into Tony, a car enthusiast and friend of Cody, who hadn't seen him in months. Tony, concerned for Cody, allowed the police full access to his accounts, but they found no trace of the email address in question. With no further leads from Jordan and Cody's phone records, the police decided to investigate the IP address associated with the email. As they awaited this crucial information, the police deepened their inquiries among Cody's social circle. It was during these discussions that Kimberly revealed insights into Jordan's state of mind before the wedding. She recounted how Jordan had repeatedly questioned her decision to marry Cody, expressing dread about the physical aspects of marriage and regretting her decision entirely. This revelation added another layer of complexity to the ongoing investigation, highlighting potential motives and state of mind that could be crucial in unraveling the truth behind Cody's tragic fate. Just 2 days before Cody vanished, Jordan expressed her unhappiness in a message to her friend Kim, saying, "I should be happy, but I'm not. If I tell him, It's going to break his heart. She also disclosed a troubling incident where Cody had physically intimidated her, which added to her distress. On July 7th, further messages revealed that Jordan was apprehensive about discussing her feelings with Cody, fearing his reaction. After their conversation that day, which escalated into a heated argument, Jordan left home to give Cody time to cool off. This decision marked a significant turning point. The police's suspicion towards Jordan intensified when they learned about these events. Soon after, the information from the email, which had misleadingly declared Cody dead, was sent from a computer at Jordan's stepfather's house. Interviews with her family suggested Jordan could be behind this email, although this alone wasn't conclusive proof. The breakthrough came when the investigation revealed that both Cody and Jordan's cell phones had pinged towers near Glacier National Park on the night Cody was last seen, despite Jordan's claims that she wasn't with him. Surveillance footage also confirmed their presence together at the park entrance at 9:17 p.m., further contradicting her statements. Faced with mounting evidence, police brought Jordan in for questioning again on July 18, 2013. Confronted with the evidence, Jordan broke down and recounted the events of July 8th. She admitted that after confessing her true feelings about their marriage, they had argued fiercely. In a moment of high tension and emotional turmoil, they went to Glacier National Park, where, according to Jordan, during an argument near a cliff, she pushed Cody, resulting in his fatal fall. She explained her actions by saying the emotional pressure and anger in that moment overwhelmed her, leading to the tragic outcome. Jordan's emotional turmoil was evident in her statement to the police, describing how she felt overwhelmed by every emotion imaginable in that tragic moment. Detectives tried to piece together the scattered details of her confession, including a mysterious scarf found at the scene, which she mentioned in an offhand comment about a blindfold. Jordan insisted that Cody's death was an accident, vehemently denying any premeditation or intent to harm him. She explained that in a moment of intense emotion and panic, she pushed Cody from the cliff when he turned his back to her, facing the precipice. Further complicating her story, Jordan admitted to creating the email at her stepfather's house and using it to send misleading messages about Cody's fate. Despite her confession, Jordan walked out of the police station without immediate charges, a decision that puzzled many. It wasn't until July 22nd at Cody's funeral that public perception shifted dramatically against her. Jordan was seen texting during the service, an act viewed by attendees as a profound disrespect during such a solemn occasion. This behavior fueled rumors that she had engineered Cody's death as a desperate escape from an unhappy marriage, avoiding the stigma of divorce in her community. The community's whispers about her motives and the lack of grief displayed at the funeral led to a growing belief that Jordan might never have truly loved Cody. Subsequently, she was charged with first and second-degree murder along with making false statements. The severity of the situation escalated when the jury, considering the evidence in her actions, added a charge of premeditated first-degree murder. Jordan's trial commenced on December 9, 2013, with the prosecution aggressively pursuing the case against her. As the trial unfolded, the evidence stacked up, and Jordan's prospects looked increasingly grim, painting a bleak picture of her future. During the trial, prosecutors meticulously dissected Jordan's narrative, challenging her credibility by highlighting her inconsistencies and questioning her claim of innocence and remorse. The testimonies from Cody's family and friends were particularly damaging. They depicted Jordan as distant and indifferent, suggesting she killed Cody to avoid intimacy with him. Her defense team initially attempted to argue self-defense, but seeing the challenging odds, Jordan opted for a plea deal. She agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 30-year sentence without parole, avoiding a first-degree murder charge that could lead to harsher penalties. However, upon learning that the prosecution still intended to pursue a charge of premeditated first-degree murder, which could extend her sentence to 50 years, Jordan attempted to retract her plea. This decision fell to a district judge who had to determine whether to accept her retraction or proceed with sentencing under the agreed plea. On December 13, 2013, Jordan Lynn Graham was sentenced to 30 years and 5 months in prison, with an additional fine of over $16,000 in restitution to Cody's family. During her sentencing hearing, Jordan took the stand to apologize, explaining that her actions were a result of shock and panic, claiming she hadn't been fully aware of their precarious location when she pushed Cody. Over the following years, Jordan made several attempts to have her sentence reduced, appealing on various grounds, but none of her appeals led to a case review or reopening. The federal prosecutors were firm in their intent to use her case as a stern warning about the severe consequences of committing a crime under federal jurisdiction. Ultimately, Jordan's sentence meant she would not be eligible for release until she was over 52 years old, firmly underscoring the gravity of her actions and the justice system's commitment to upholding severe penalties for serious crimes.